from the Library of Congress and the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture.
This is Emilye Crosby on December 8th, 2015, and we're in Baltimore at Betty Garman Robinson's home, and we're interviewing Dorothy Zellner, Dottie Zellner, as part of the Civil Rights History Project, co-sponsored by the Library of Congress and the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. And also with us is John Bishop, and Guha Shankar is here as well. Dottie, could you start by telling us when and where you were born and about your family?
Yes, I was born in New York City, January 14th, 1938, the oldest of three children. My parents are both immigrants. My father's people came from Lithuania to England. He was born in England. He emigrated at age 11 in 1910 to Toronto, Canada. My mother was born in Kiev, which is now the Ukraine, but she always considered it to be Russia. A babe in arms at 6 months to Toronto, Canada. Both of them emigrated to the United States. They were married here, and they were both naturalized. I'm the oldest of three children. My sister is Eleanor, a year and a half younger than I, and my brother, Jonathan, is 5 years younger.
Can you describe your growing up years in New York?
My father was a dentist, and he became a dentist because as a Jewish person in Canada, he couldn't be a teacher. There was one teacher in the entire country in Canada in the 30s, one Jewish teacher. So he became a dentist, second best, and he migrated to the United States in 1929, a very key year. Didn't have a job for 3 years, and actually was hospitalized at one point for malnutrition. I'd say the big factor of my growing up as a young child was World War II. And I have very distinct memories of air raid drills and pulling down black curtains on the windows. And my father was eccentric, to say the least, and he and my mother, who was his quote-unquote nurse, his assistant, they worked in the front of our apartment, and we lived in the back 3 rooms. It was a typical immigrant mom-and-pop operation, differing only in vocation from many, many other hundreds of thousands of families who also lived and worked in the same place. And my father was totally worked up about the war. He, in between patients, he would run back into our living space, which was 3 rooms in the back. He would turn on the radio to get the war news. My father was left-wing, my mother was left-wing. They were both highly involved in, the issues of the day. And both of them had come from Orthodox Jewish families. They were not Orthodox, they were secular, but quite Jewish. And living out, I remember the war was living in our house. The war was another member of the family. And another early memory I had was that my father was a great movie fan, and he took us to the movies. Now, who us was, I must have been about 7 or 8, or 7. I think the war was still going on. And there was a newsreel that accompanied the film. It must have been a cartoon movie that he took us to. And there was a newsreel film of the war, which he was not anticipating. And there, I actually remember seeing a child hobbling along with crutches and one missing leg. And I became so frightened and upset that I crawled under the seat in the movie theater, and they had to pull me out. So the war was this ever-present specter in our house. And after the war, I came across a book called The Black Book, which was in my parents' library, and it was a picture book of the concentration camps. And I remember reading it, and I guess I was about 8 then. And being the oldest child, I was very protective of my younger sibs, and I took the book and I threw it in the garbage. And the garbage cans were in the hall outside our apartment. And when my mother saw the book in the garbage, she had a fit. My mother and my father had a fit too. And their attitude was not that I, as a young child, had been petrified by these photos, but that I had had the temerity to throw away a book. You never throw away a book. And that was what was the message that was sent to me. So the question about the war was, now looking back on it, a lot of fear, and were we, I mean, as Jews, going to survive? Now, if you had asked me that at age 7, I would not have been able to articulate that at all, but that was what was simmering around us. And when I give talks now, which I have been doing for 30 years, I tell people that it was not just a theoretical question, it was an actual question. Were we going to make it was a real question. And actually, if things had happened differently, we wouldn't have. Actually wouldn't have made it. And when my father was cheering on the Red Army, he was very correct to do that, because if it hadn't been for the Red Army, the German army would possibly have triumphed. So it was a very vivid thing. Hitler was a real person, you know. These were all real people.
You mentioned that your father couldn't be a teacher in Toronto. So did Canada have some kind of prohibition on Jewish teachers?
I don't know if it was statutory or whether it was custom, but it was a very anti-Semitic country. And he always felt that it was very provincial, very boring, very waspy, very provincial.
Is that why they migrated? Or is that
Yes.
Did your mother have
yes.
a similar feeling?
Yes. And I think it was because both of them were exposed to the broader world. They were both on the left. And Toronto was like being in Ishkabibble, Idaho, you know, something like that. So that's why they came.
And you talked about the war a lot and about it being almost like another part of your house, and Hitler's a real person. So from that, I get the impression that your parents talked to you about the how Jews fit into that war.
I don't remember their actual words, but they talked about it. They talked about what was happening to the extent that they knew. And by extension, their concern about Jews was extended outward to other people who were marginalized and in difficulty. And I remember asking him when I was about 8 or 9, I said, "Daddy, I don't understand." I said, how did they know who we were? So I must have been quite preoccupied with it. And he said that they didn't know. And that's, as it turns out, that's why they had to register everybody, because they didn't know. And I remember thinking, well, a lot of times they didn't know who we were, but they would have known who a black person was. So from an early age, I think there was a sort of an awareness. And I do remember when I was about 5, one of my younger moments, actually, I remember getting on a bus with my mother in the city. And there were some black people on the bus. And I remember saying to her in a very loud voice, "Why aren't they speaking to each other? Are they angry with each other?" And she said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, they're all in the same family. Why aren't they talking?" And of course, she became mortified that I had asked such a question out loud. So it made a big impression on me. That's why I remember that I had made some horrible faux pas. But I was obviously I was conscious. And I don't remember that they had very many black friends, but they did have a few, and my father had a few black patients. And my father also was very, very, very devoted to the veterans of the Spanish Civil War. And he had not gone to the Spanish Civil War to volunteer. I don't know exactly why. Later on, when World War II was started, he then had 2 children, and he was in his 40s, and he tried to enlist, but they wouldn't take him, that he was too old. But about the Spanish Civil War, he always treated all of the vets that were in his practice free for the rest of their lives, the rest of his life. And he repeated that with some of the people from SNCC. And he treated them, you know, and he was only one part of really, I think, considerable number of medical people who took care of civil rights vets. And let me hop to one story about that. When Bill Hansen was in jail, don't know where, I must have been Arkansas, and he got his jaw, Albany, and his jaw was broken. In Albany, they wired up his jaw together, and they told him that he could get it unwired in a month. So he had to walk around with his jaw wired together for a month, and he was able to drink through a straw. And on the day when, you know, the wires could be taken off, I guess I arranged that my father would take out the wires. So he came to the office, and I remember my father took all the wires out, and then Bill was totally crestfallen to find out that this had fallen on a Friday, and as a Catholic, he couldn't eat meat. And he had been longing to have a huge steak like this big. And he said, oh no, it's Friday, I had to have fish. Of course, thinking back, oh, can you imagine? I mean, such a thing happening today that would never happen today. So, you know, I don't know how many other people he treated, but I remember, you know, Bill was... So then my father had a whole bunch of friends who came over. My mother had friends. They were all lefties. They were very concerned about everything. I remember in high school, I came home one day and one of my father's friends were in the house. My father loved his friends. And I said, well, today we were told, this was in 1954 now when I was in high school, I said in class that the United States was starting to send aid to the French to fight in Vietnam. And the teacher said it was absolutely false. And my father's friend, Saul, 2 days later he came in, he said, take this to your teacher. And it was an article in the New York Times. And I did, and I raised my hand and I said, I want you to know. And I read him the article, and he was very embarrassed, I'm happy to say. So I sort of felt like there were some adults sort of cheering us on, because then when we were in high school, we were in the depths of the McCarthy days, and there were a lot of people who were sort of, I don't know, keeping an eye on us that we would be okay out in McCarthy days. Now, during the war, there was a feeling actually of camaraderie, and that dissipated soon enough, and I'd say by 1949. Now, there were problems. Now, in our apartment building, which consisted of 6 floors with the fire escape out front, which I made a mistake of describing as a tenement, in an article I wrote later on in life, my mother took high exception to this. We never lived in a tenement, but actually it was a tenement. A tenement is not a pejorative word, actually. Living in our house was a leading member of the Communist Party and his family. And we were quite friendly with them. And in New York.
You said in your house, do you mean
In the
apartment
building, in the apartment
building?
building, in the apartment building where I lived till I was 13. And we became very friendly with that family. And the father, the male parent of this family, was arrested in 1951 under the Smith Act. The Smith Act charge, people don't remember this at all when I tell these young people, the Smith Act made it a crime to conspire and advocate the overthrow of the U.S. government by force and violence. So first you had to advocate, and then you had to conspire. It was two steps removed, at least, from actual violence. And not one of these people was ever convicted of ever even having a pea shooter, much less a gun. It was extreme McCarthyism, and it was singling out this party as the source of all devils and evils. So, of course, I imagine we had FBI watching. They had FBI watching, and when he was arrested, the father was arrested, it was 7 o'clock in the morning. They came tramping up the stairs in the 6-story, building. Everybody, all of us knew who were in the house that this had happened. This was very traumatic, very traumatic. So I always felt growing up that I was definitely marginalized, definitely. I knew I was in a group of very unpopular people. And by then, of course, the McCarthyism was extreme. I mean, it's even hard to describe this to younger people. Here's an example. When I was in high school, I was a junior in high school, so I graduated in 1955. In 1954, our class decided that as a graduation speaker, we wanted to invite J. Robert Oppenheimer, who was one of the atomic scientists. This was so outlandish and extreme, viewed by the principal of our high school, that he refused. Now, Oppenheimer was one of the semi-suspect scientists working on the Manhattan Project. Certainly not a raving red by any means, but nevertheless somebody who had criticized the building of the atomic bomb, that was his great sin, and who was reluctantly participating in, rearming with atomic weapons. This was such an extreme thing that they almost closed down the school. I mean, it was an unbelievable thing, hard to even identify with, So I don't know how deep you want me to go. I mean, the signal event of my teenage life was when the Rosenbergs were executed. And my friend Freddie, the son of the family I was just talking about, he and I and his mother and my mother, the four of us went to Washington. I was 15. He was 14. And while we were in Washington, the Supreme Court issued a stay of execution. And instead of everybody coming back, a lot of people stayed over in Washington. And Freddie's mother said he could stay, and my mother very reluctantly said I could stay. So there we were in front of the White House all night, picketing in front of the White House. And one of my memories is that along with us was picketing this young woman in high heels, and it was Mary Travers, soon to be in Peter, Paul, and Mary, who was then a couple of years older than I was, and she was there. So you can see, coming into the movement, I was not your typical average, American teenager, okay? And I was quite romantic. I was living on books and stories about the war, and I actually probably was a teenage expert on what had happened to the Jews, and particularly the stories about the Warsaw Ghetto, which is where the Jews were captured and from which they were brought to the extermination camps. And in April of 1943, they had a revolt. 6 weeks, they held off the German army for 6 weeks. And this was the only civilian armed uprising, including, and I've just been to Paris a month ago, including the Great French Resistance, which fought for 6 days in Paris. This was 6 weeks, fighting by desperate people who knew they were going to be killed and who just decided if they were going to go, they were going to bring as many of them with them as they could. This made an indelible impression on me to this very day. To this very day, I consider it not only an obligation, but an honor. That if you are up against the fascists and you have no other recourse, that you must bring as many of them with you as you can. So by the time the civil rights movement came along, was there really a question? Now, there might have been a question. I think Freddie urged me to go. Other people urged me to go. I don't think I was just sitting there thinking about this myself. But I do remember, and I've talked about it many times, but I remember where I was even sitting when I read the paper and I read the story about the sit-ins. I remember every single thing about that.
You alluded to the fact that you have vivid memories of reading about the sit-in movement. Do you have memories of other aspects of the civil rights movement from before that?
Oh, yes.
So,
well, somewhere along the line in high school, I joined the NAACP. And it was just, with the friends that I had, especially being on the left, I mean, it was a given. You were going to support black people. And actually, I have to say that I have a totally thrilling memory that I will share with you. I don't know how old I was. I maybe 14 or 13 or 14. Freddie's father was friends with Paul Robeson, who, of course, was a great, tremendous hero of my youth. And Paul Robeson must have been coming to visit him. And my father must have been coming out of the office or something. It was the daytime. And it was 2nd Avenue and 18th Street. And across the street comes Freddie's father, Jerry, who was about 5'7". My father, who was 5'2". No, maybe he was 5'4". And Paul Robeson, who was about 7 feet tall. And they're walking across 2nd Avenue. Paul Robeson, oh my God. And so, anyway, I wouldn't say that, I don't remember going to Harlem. I remember having some black friends, not really close black friends, but it was an article of faith that this is something that you would be involved in. So when the bus boycott, I remember actually the day of Brown versus Board, and everyone really getting excited. And I remember those banner headlines. So Brown versus Board was 54, so I was 16. So I was 16. So, and I remember going on demonstrations, I guess it was about the bus boycott. I mean, the bus boycott was totally thrilling, completely thrilling. I don't remember ever seeing Dr. King at all in New York. I don't remember any of that. What was your initial question?
Memories of the civil rights movement.
Yes.
Before.
Oh, the civil rights movement was very, very, very present. And I think in simple-minded psychological terms, the civil rights movement replaced what I had vicariously experienced as revolt by Jewish young people during the war. This was like our time. This was our moment. That's why I got so electrified. I wish I knew the name of the place. I just know, I know where I was on, where I was. I was on 42nd Street. And the main library, I had been at the library doing something. I don't remember what. And I went across the street. There was a coffee shop there, and I sat down at the counter. Isn't that ironic, at the counter? And of course, as I've told all these kids, we all smoked. Oh my God, did we smoke like chimneys, you know, coffee. And I remember sitting there, I opened up the paper. What? What? And it wasn't so much that they couldn't be served. It was that they didn't get up. They didn't get up. And it was just thrilling. And now I keep saying to myself, I should go to the microfilm at the 42nd Street Library and see what page it was on. I always say it's page 16, page 37. I don't actually remember, but it was not page 1, I'll tell you that.
And so this is the coverage of the Greensboro sit-in.
Yes, right.
Was there a picture?
Nope.
It was just that little, short little...
A little,
first
and you
article.
remember in those days they called the Times the Gray Lady because it was gray, gray, gray. They had hardly any photos. Tiny, tiny type and ads. And I don't remember what page. I have to find out someday. Someday, somebody must know. It's in some history book somewhere
And so
about
at
what
this point,
page.
It's February...
February 2nd.
Right, so the sit-in, the first Greensboro sit-in is February 1st, so you're reading
Right,
about it on
right.
February 2nd.
Oh my God.
And you're
Electrified.
college graduate
Yes, college
Living at home?
graduate, what?
and living at home.
College graduate, living at home, had just graduated, looking around for a job, which I did. I got a short-term job at the National Guardian, which was a left-wing newspaper, being very unsettled, not knowing what I was going to do. A lot of the girls that I knew were already married, and some of them had become pinned. I don't know if you know what that even is. Do you know what that is? To be wearing a fraternity pin, and where they would wear it was as close to the nipple as possible. And these bras were like this then, you know, like arrows, like the prow of boats. And they would wear this thing right here. Oh my God, it was ridiculous. And so those people were already married. And then half of the other people, you know, had to be engaged. My sister got married when she was 20. I was 20, I was a year and a half older, and people came to me at the wedding and said, "Don't worry, dear, your time will come." And I was 21.
Were you worried?
I think I was worried. I mean, I think, yeah, sure, I was worried. I mean, if they were worried, how come I wasn't worried? I mean, of course I was worried, a little worried. So I was, you know, I was at a good place. I mean, had I had family responsibilities, I probably never would have gone. Knowing me, I would not have gone. So finally, I found through Freddie's her girlfriend Jocelyn, and she was working at the Corps office. And she said, "There's going to be this workshop." So I was not brave like other people, you know, I saw people for years coming south. They would walk in the office on Raymond Street with a suitcase. "Okay, here I am. I've just come from blah, blah, blah." And I remember being very irked with them. Like, "Why didn't you tell us you were coming? And, you know, what is this?" Just popping up. I would never have done that. Never, no, never. So I enrolled in this workshop. And we went to Miami, Florida. This was Corps. There were a lot of people there from Louisiana. I ended up living in Louisiana for 17 years, but had absolutely no idea that was going to happen. And some people who turned out to be kind of famous. There was, just died, Rudy Lombard. There was a white guy named Hugh Murray. There was one of the twins, Pam and her married name was D-U-E. Pat, that's right, Patricia and Priscilla, can't think of their last name. Stevens, exactly. And Angie Butler. Angie Butler was in that group from Nashville, that's right. And we all gathered in Miami, and actually some of the people were pro. I mean, Angie was a pro by then. She had been arrested several times, and it was 4 months after the sit-ins. So the sit-ins were February, this is March, April, May, June. It was June, 4 months after the sit-ins started.
How long was the workshop? What
The-
were you doing?
well,
at
the workshop, as I recall, here my memory gets a little fuzzy. It was about 2 weeks, and the idea was, from the core point of view, that everybody would be trained as nonviolent organizers and go back. But going back, the core was, they were not in the rural areas at all, and the only place in the South where they actually were was New Orleans. So they were heavy-duty northern people. Jim Lowy was one of the people, and he was there. And so there were people who were never going to be working south. They were going back north. And I don't remember what their organizational overview was. I was, just one of the people. Looking back, now that I'm thinking about it, which I don't often, they must have also been looking for another generation of members, supporters, fundraisers. They probably wanted as a big geographical spread as they possibly could get.
Well, of course,
And
you just alluded to that, but core is basically an
urban northern, yeah. But they had this kind of branch in Louisiana. They were strong in Louisiana.
Do you have a sense at all from that they're trying to make inroads into the South, especially if they're bringing these sit-in veterans?
Yes. I don't think they succeeded, but because their roots, their administration, everything was in the North. And we had some national leaders there. Marvin, whatever his last name was, Rich was there. And I have a picture somewhere of all of these people. So that was amazing experience. And do you want the story of the arrest and all of that? Okay, so we were sitting at this restaurant, the name of which I can't remember, but Angie Butler remembered. And they wouldn't serve us. We would not be served. I don't remember how many people, 17 maybe. And on the way out, we started to sing. I think I was one of the first people. I'm happy to say that we was out we started singing. And then I realized, it dawned on me that I was the only white woman in the group. And we were on the way to jail. And this is what I tell these young people now. I say, look, you think it's only the lunch counters and only the buses. So I say, from the time you got up in the morning to the time you went to bed, your entire life was formulated on the basis of your color. And I go into a list, which they're very shocked to hear. I said, of course, the jails, do they care about the jails? But it didn't dawn on them that the jails were segregated. And I talk about how, when I went to Atlanta, middle-class black women would spend $400 for a dress, couldn't try on the dress, no dressing rooms, had to take it home, too bad, didn't fit, too bad. And then I noticed all these young women are nodding at me like, oh, talk about the dentist's office, the doctor's office. So here I was on the way to jail. Okay, so it was very frightening. And they brought me into this cell, and it was at night. So the bed was not made. So there was some sort of covering, and I lay on the mattress. Oh, the next morning, the women said, "You slept on that?" Oh, God, they must have thought, this poor little thing had no idea. I don't know what I was supposed to do, sit up all night? I wasn't about, and it was on the upper bunk. Oh, detail I have forgotten about till this moment. So I wasn't about to be making a bed in the middle of the night, So the matron came in, and we all had to line up, and she did not call me a nigger lover or anything like that. But they all knew there was something peculiar about me. She handed me this mop. The mop weighed about 30 pounds and mopped the floor. Now, believe me, that housework was not my strong suit at the best of time. So I did something, pushed the mop around, and they made ruthless fun of me, these women. Oh, my God, what? But I don't remember them being vicious. And I really, I mean, aside from being petrified that I was in jail, I didn't really feel any terrible menacing coming. I think they must have asked me why I was there. And I must have said, arrested at a lunch counter. I didn't know how to lie. I probably said that. And who were they? They were check forgers. They were white, white collar women. It was obvious, no money to feed the kids, though, petty thieves, that kind of thing. They shouldn't have even been there to begin with. So after the whole day went on like this, then they called me into a meeting with the lawyer, and they said, people are coming out. If you want to come out, you can come out. I guess they had gotten the bond. They didn't want to keep us there for days and days. And I said, yeah, I want to come out. So I have a picture, by the way, of me through the bars. Yep.
When are you going to share that picture with me?
Okay, well, I have to lay my hands on it now, but it's from the newspaper. There was a newspaper article about me, and it's me behind the screen.
You said that, people were coming out. I know that, Patricia
Some people, Stevens, she
said-
stayed in.
Okay,
Angie stayed in.
because some of them had already, I think the Stevens sisters had already done jail no bail.
That's right.
Their sit-in, and so I wondered if there's any discussion about staying in. Of course, you have nobody to discuss it with.
No, I had nobody to discuss it with, and I don't remember any discussion ahead of time. Now, that would have been nice as an organizing thing to say, if you're arrested, what are we going to do? Are we staying in? Nothing. And now, looking back, there was I didn't expect any special treatment, but it seemed to me as an organizer, the many years later, I would have noticed that, there is one white woman here. Do we need to do something special here? Because obviously I was in minimal danger. I don't think I was terrible. I wasn't endangered, but it would have occurred to me if I had been an administrator, maybe this is our weak link here. And maybe that's one of the reasons they wanted to get me out also, but they didn't communicate that with me. It was left entirely up to me. I think Angie stayed in, other people stayed in. But they had an administrative problem because they had this project, where they're going to keep people in jail forever. Looking back, now that I'm talking about it, it wasn't very well thought out.
Were you expecting to get arrested? I had the impression that you maybe weren't expecting to be arrested and then ended up being arrested. And I'm not sure why I think that, but it's sort of like a little more.
It's possible. It's possible. I mean, they chose the restaurant. They must have cased out the place first. They must have.
And so this was basically your practicum, right? You've been studying the theory of nonviolence, and now you go out on your
And they did the usual thing, beforehand, we lay it down on the floor, hold your head. People would come and scream at you. I do remember that they had us change roles. Either you were the victim or you were the perp. And in these little practical things, they made us the perps. Well, the people who were the perps had to scream every vile thing they could possibly scream. And I remember screaming, getting unbelievably upset that I was standing there screaming, and how easy it was, to tell you the truth. You can stand there, you can turn into a fascist, unless you're careful. Unless you're careful.
Do you remember in that workshop having any sense of males and females having different roles, or there being any concern about women being heard and men being protected?
No, I don't remember anything like that. But I think I was very poor. I was definitely a poor subject when it came to women. I had no consciousness of myself as a woman at all. I think up until that point, up for several years afterwards, I was following along a true and unorthodox path. Nevertheless, it was expected. I was going to get married. I was going to have children. It was all programmed. And this was a rather unorthodox way of going about it. But there was nothing.
For a spouse in
Nothing.
the Miami jail.
So then I didn't want to leave them. That was when it all came over. I didn't want to leave, so I begged them to take me with them to New Orleans.
And because there was a large contingent.
There was a large contingent of, that's what I mean, that they were strong in Louisiana, stronger, I should say, in Louisiana. And a whole bunch of them were going back. I stayed with somebody whose name I can't remember, a black woman who lived on Claiborne or near Claiborne Avenue. And I stayed at least a week, if not 2 weeks, and they were getting ready for the first sit-in, which they had not had yet. Now that was kind of interesting. Somebody will write an article about that, because there was what was the name of the black college there? There were two. Dillard and Loyola, not Loyola, Loyola. Xavier, Dillard and Xavier. So that was kind of unusual that they had not had any sit-ins there. I don't exactly know why. Somebody knows why, but I don't know why. Maybe there was infighting in the community. I don't know exactly why. So when we got there, they were definitely ready to do it, but it was, now that I'm thinking about it, it was coming from outside. It was coming from the core people. It was not coming from the local students. I mean, it was coming from Hugh. It was coming from this woman who I stayed with. It was people who lived there, who were resident there, but it was not coming from student groups, as I recall. So we met in the Y, the Black Y, and so I was making signs. You know, I had gone to music and art high school. This is where my art career came in handy. So I was making signs. And then there was this, I was, as one of the white people, I was to case the Woolworths on Canal Street. So we did that. There were several of us. And we cased the place, and where was the, you know, well, what was going to happen, and where was the lunch counter, and so forth and so on. And then my role was, they asked me would I do outreach into the white community. And so I went to see this rather famous priest named Father Fichter, who was at the white Loyola. Okay, Loyola was white. And he had been very well known as very good on racial issues. And the Catholic Church, actually, was definitely more advanced than almost any institution there. They had already integrated their schools. And I met him. I told him that there were going to be sit-ins there, the first sit-in, and could they do anything? And he said, yes, we will help. We will talk about it in our, you know, in our parishes. I will spread out the word. Very, very cooperative. And then they told me to go to him and to go to the rabbi, one of the big rabbis. And that's where I went to see this rabbi who kicked me out of his office, which I must say, now in retrospect, he didn't realize what a big favor he was doing, because I have used that story 55 years. Thank you very much, Rabbi Jules Feibelman, Feibelman. You don't remember him? No, don't remember him at all. And I was extremely upset when he threw me out of his office, really upset. And, you know, as I said, that has stayed me in good stead as a Jewish activist now, that this rabbi threw me out, when the Catholic had invited me in, okay? And I just should say parenthetically that as the years went on and I traveled around the South, I learned what had happened to the Jews there. And I remember one time, Bob and I drove through, it must have been Haneyville. Am I saying it right? Bob Zellner, my former husband. Is it Haneyville? Am I right?
Haynesville?
Well, we pronounced it, it's in Alabama. In Lowndes County.
I think it's Hayneville, but I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, if it's Hayneville, then I think some of the local people, I don't know, I have to look at it. I remember it as Haneyville, but it's probably wrong. And I remember going through that town. I will never forget that town. I don't know what it looks like now. Then it looked like a movie set. It looked just like Intruder in the Dust, or the one with Atticus Finch, To Kill a Mockingbird. And there was the town square like this, and there were men on their chairs tilted back. There were the trees with the, the vines, Spanish moths, yes, hanging down. And there was Goldberg's store. Or if it wasn't Goldberg, it was Feinberg, it was somebody's store. And in the middle of blankety blank nowhere, I would actually, am I allowed to use bad language on this? Probably not. Not, okay.
I would prefer you didn't.
Okay. So
You certainly don't have to quote people.
okay, all right. So then I began to, as the years went on, I understood how they had gotten there. Their role was not enviable. They were not accepted by anybody. They were always trying desperately to be white. They were never secure. They were like the Chinese store owner in Greenwood, who was the same way, trying so hard to be white, and he would never be white, no matter what he did. And I don't know, someday maybe somebody will write some books about them. And maybe they have.
In another conversation, that when you were in Miami on the workshop, that a lot of people were telling you about SNCC.
Oh, yes. Oh, no, absolutely. Absolutely. I realized while I was there, and then when I was in desperation, I had to go to New Orleans, that I had found something that I wanted to come back. I knew I wanted to come back. And so I started asking people, I said, well, what do you advise? And Bernard Lafayette was in this group. And it was Bernard who said to me, SNCC, go to SNCC. And so I sort of stored that away in my mind, that SNCC was, I didn't know a thing about SNCC. So I was in New Orleans, I guess, for a couple of weeks, and then we had the famous sit-ins. The sit-ins were spectacular, I must say, they really were. And one of my assignments was to drive the car. So keep track of what I'm saying, Emily, because I want to skip ahead and say something about cars.
Okay.
It's only after we did the book, The Hands on the Freedom Plow, that I realized that SNCC had no resources except for one, cars, okay? And that it became a big issue. Who controlled the cars and who drove the cars, okay? So young women are very surprised to hear that if you were in a intergender group, a woman never drove a car if a man was in the group and could drive a car. Never, like never. And our book has many wonderful stories in it about cars and who controlled the cars. And the best one is O'Hara Simmons, who was a project director and controlled, the car was controlled by the previous project director, who then left. And she felt it came within her purview, as everybody else did, except this guy who wanted to take the car with him. So then I realized cars loomed very big. And you talk about our great characters like Stokely. Stokely, in my mind, is inseparable from a car. And we had these legendary drivers. People would talk about so-and-so drove. They drove like bats out of hell, but they must have been fantastic drivers. And Maria Varela has a story in there, in Hands On, where she's driving, trying to escape the Klan at 110 miles an hour. Cars loom very, very heavily under the story. Anyway, You
said something not very long ago about how Stokely would come into
Oh,
town.
yes. Oh. Well, Stokely was head of the 2nd District. The whole Mississippi was divided into districts, and his district was one of the really popping districts, because it was not only Greenwood, it was Tallahatchie County was these truly unbelievably terrible places. Ruleville was in the 2nd district. I don't know if Greenville was in the 2nd district. Oh, Greenville. And so he was with me making the rounds all the time. He was an unbelievable character. He was about 6'3", skinny like this, very, very handsome, very charismatic. And he would drive in. We always knew it was him. He would drive in, put his feet on the brakes. The gravel would be flying. Get out of the car. Smooth his clothes down. He was an unbelievable character, unbelievable. So that's the way he drove. So driving was very important, and actually driving was, because your life could depend on how well people drove. And so women seldom, if ever, drove. So and back to this story, I was supposed to drive. Now I am
In New Orleans, we're back
in New Orleans. Now
sit-ins.
we're back in the sit-ins, 1960, and I was supposed to drive. And I was a terrible driver. I had learned to drive late in life in New York City, where none of us had a car. But I did have a license. And evidently, I don't remember why nobody else could drive. I have no idea. So after the event, they had me driving, and we almost got killed, I'm sure. We were going around a traffic circle, which later on, living there 17 years, I went around all the time. And I had no idea what I was doing. And everybody was screaming in the car, "Oh, what are you doing?" It's screaming. "We never should have let you drive." Oh, my God. So it was very dramatic, because Hugh Murray's father had been driving along in Hanrahan. I think they were from Hanrahan. And he heard on the radio that a sit-in was going on, and that there was a white man in the group. And I think they must have said his name, or he knew it was his son. So he came storming into the Woolworths, through the cops, they roped it off, and literally grabbed Hugh and dragged him off the seat and dragged him away. And Hugh, actually, I don't know if it was ever the same again. I met him a few times over the years. He was kind of an eccentric character. The white people who lived there, the southern white people, they had very little support. And this was a big thing, was covered in the Times-Picayune. And I don't really know. I think he's written something, if I'm not sure. He might have written something, Hugh Murray. So then I went home, and I said, oh, well, SNCC is the place to go. Bernard said SNCC. Other people had said SNCC. Corps was not an attractive thing to me.
Do you know why?
Well, I suppose first of all, there were very few what I would later came to call local people. Even though the Stevenses, I think, were from South Carolina or North Carolina. From Florida. Oh, that's right, from Florida. There were several people from New Orleans there, but a lot of people from New York. I don't know. I just didn't want to be in New York. I just felt it was a Southern thing. I don't even know how much I thought about it. But it wasn't attractive to me. Definitely was not. And so all through that year, I was writing letters to SNCC. And little did I know they were throwing them in the garbage. There was nobody there to even open them. And I just thought, well, they're not interested, Oh, what did I know? I finally got a job. For my first job after I came back was this horrible job doing proofreading for a scientific magazine, proofreading equations. Can you imagine anything more terrible than that? I lasted about 6 months on that. Then I had to leave. Then I finally got a job in the welfare department. The welfare department was like the home for everybody there. It didn't matter who you were, you graduated, you had nowhere to go, you went into the welfare department. And I was a welfare investigator, which was another story we'll get to some other year. And then, by a peculiar fluke, because life is made of all these flukes, it turns out that a black guy had been hired at the Southern Regional Council, and his name was James A. Moss, M-O-S-S. He had been a professor at Queens College when I was the editor of the student newspaper. And he was the only black professor in the entire school. And his contract was not renewed. And he came to me and told me his story. And I was totally outraged, and I wanted to do a story about it, but he wouldn't let me. He was afraid. And he felt he would never be hired anywhere else. And he left.
Do you know why he would come to you about the story?
Yes,
Even if he didn't want it
because-
to be published?
Yes, I think he wanted some emotional support, and I think I was the editor of the paper. I was known as a lefty, and I think that's why he came to me. Otherwise, I would never have known. So one of the many, many places that I wrote to get a job was the Southern Regional Council. And here, James Moss had just been hired as the research director. And he saw my letter. See how life is so... And he said, oh, I know her, hire her. So in 3 weeks, I was down there. From the time that he got the letter, I was down there. I said, okay, everybody, I'm going. And I said to my parents, who were probably very happy to get rid of me. And my mother, I remember, my mother didn't want me to go, but she helped me pack a trunk. A trunk. I took a trunk down there. I took sheets. I took silverware. I mean, I don't know
You were
what...
going to go marry the Southern Regional Council.
I was going to marry the Southern movement, is what I was going to do. And so, yes, so I went down there, and I became a research associate, what they called then. And they actually put me to very good use, because I am the one who did the research for that Southern Regional Council report, which was about the first 18 months of the civil rights movement, of the sit-in movement. Heavily edited by Les Dunbar, of course, and I think appropriately so. But I am the one who went through all the newspaper clippings and everything, added things and tallied them and blah, 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 made up all the categories, figured out, and it was really an impressive thing. And when they issued it, I remember very well, it ended up on the front page of the New York Times, this report. Not my name, of course. I didn't exist. My name was not on this thing at all, as the style of those days. Research people, they did the work, they wrote it, and they were gone to history, from history. So that was very useful. And then... and I lived on the white side of town. I lived on Peachtree Street, one of the many Peachtree Streets. And SRC was an interracial organization, so we went many places together when we could. I lived the double life. I went on the white side, and I went on the black side as well.
So what was it like to work? You said you were sort of on the white side and the black
Yes.
side of town while you worked for
Well,
SRC.
I must say I had some guilty moments, but it didn't stop me from working on the from living on the white side. I didn't really have a way of getting to the black side. And often the black people came to my house on the white side after dark. Mm-hmm. And looking back, I mean, weren't they ashamed? Wasn't I ashamed? I mean, really, it was overt. Oh, it was nighttime? You can go to her house at nighttime. What is that?
Did you talk about it?
No. I mean, I remember black people, friends of mine, who worked there. This was an interracial organization. And it was just taken as a matter of course. Well, of course, she lives on the white side, so we have to go make sure that her neighbors can't see. I remember going to places that I knew my black colleagues couldn't go to. I wasn't easy about that. I only had one white friend that I had met other than SRC. And of course, she had nothing to do with the civil rights movement. So she was the one, oh, let's go here, let's go there. And that's where I went.
What would happen when you go places on the black side?
Oh, on the black side, it was always, are we going to be arrested? Except when we went to a black place. It's hard to This is what I tell these kids. I say, try to put your mind in a place where you're going to a dangerous neighborhood. I said, what does that mean when people say you're going to a dangerous neighborhood now? Well, of course, it means a black neighborhood, a Latino neighborhood. I said, with us, it was the white neighborhood that was the dangerous neighborhood. And so it was when we were in the black community, felt completely safe, completely safe. White people, you know, I don't know what that means to a psychologist, would have some interesting insights, you know. What do you look at when you look in the mirror? You know, you're saying to yourself, well, I'm one of them. But no, I'm not one of them, you know. And then Jane came to work at Jane Bond, came to work. And we liked each other a lot right away. And she was dying to move out of her house. She had been a graduate student in Indiana or somewhere, coming back. She didn't want to live at home. I was able to find a reason to be on the black side. I mean, in those days, to live alone as a woman, getting an apartment, was not easy, and very few people did it. And for me to have gone into the black side, I don't even know if anybody would have rented to me. I don't know, but I didn't even try. So then Jane and I set up household at 2222 Telhurst Street, which, by the way, the last time I was in California, Jane and I went to see. I mean, not when I was in California. When I was in Atlanta, Mary King took me to Telhurst Street, and I told Jane about it when I saw her in California. And we lived there for a year and a half. And so I think I might have met Jane before I met Julian. And all this time I was in SRC, and people would come in regularly, visitors, other countries, and they'd say, oh, and here we're having a meeting here, and blah, blah, and now we're going to SNCC. I knew perfectly well where SNCC was. I had tried to work for them, but they had, you know, not responded. And they were literally 20 minutes away by foot. And I couldn't get there. And I was reading about all of these people in the newspaper. And they were part of the people that I was making my report about. And among others, I kept seeing this name, you know, Robert Zellner. And I thought to myself, what is this Jewish boy doing running all around here? His father was a minister, so I had no idea who he was. And finally, there was this Swedish journalist named Per Larsson. And he came, it was around in October, and he said, I'm going to SNCC now. How do I get there? And blah, blah. I said, I'm going with you. And I finally worked up the courage. 5 months it took me.
So did you start working for SRC like summer of 61 or spring
It's
of
June of
61?
61.
June 61.
Yep. And I went over to SNCC the first time in October of 61.
Good timing.
Good timing, because Foreman had been there a month. If I had gone there 2 months earlier, there would have been nothing. I would never, who knows when I would have gone back. So I don't remember what happened to Per Larsson. I don't know what happened. Then my next memory is meeting Foreman. And that became this momentous thing that he said to me. So I remember he shook my hand and he said, can you type? And I said, yes. And he said, good, we need you. Okay? Now later that became deconstructed by feminists as the most terrible thing a man could say. And I've said many times, I was beyond thrilled that he asked me if I could type. I was so happy I could type. By then I knew that my ability to function in the South was limited, okay? Putting it mildly. First of all, I was a woman. Second of all, I was a white woman. White woman equals death to black men. Third, I was from the North. What else was I going to do? Okay? This is why I later had very little sympathy with the poor white women who felt that their skills were not being developed enough. So I said, yes, I can type. And he right away put me to work typing. And then it wasn't initially the same day. It was probably a couple of weeks later. I went up to him and I said, you know, Foreman, I can write also. And maybe I said to him, I was the editor of my paper. I don't remember if I even said. And he said, good. I'm going to put you to work with Julian. So I think probably by December, November, December, I had met Julian. And maybe Jane and I started living together a little bit later. I'm not sure exactly.
And Julian is
Julian Bond.
and
James' brother. And we started right away working on the Student Voice, right away. And this is where Foreman's, great genius was, that he was walking around with this switchboard in his head. And of course I say switchboard here, but young people don't even know what that is. It's a board with holes in it, and you put these screws into the right place, the plugs into the right place. He knew everything. He was walking around, he knew the whole organization was laid out in his mind in a kind of 3D version. He knew, we need people here. Oh, we need people to do that. We need people to do this. And when I said what I could do, he just instantly knew. I mean, literally, he didn't sit down, think. I mean, he knew right away. Yes, you can type. Good, because we have people coming from the field. They need to write affidavits. They need to do this. We need you to type. That's mostly what I remember typing. But it got so in the later years that he would hand me his mail. And he'd hand me a whole letter. He'd say, no. I wrote the whole letter. Said no. And then he'd sign it. Or he'd say, tell them next week. I mean, he would say the briefest possible thing. And I would write his mail, write his letters.
So he would just leave it up to you to figure out what to say to people?
Yeah,
and how to
but he
handle
told
it?
me what to say.
Well, he told you.
He told me the essence. The request is denied, the request is accepted. I mean, whatever it was. And I wrote 4 paragraphs, And I talked about SNCC, and I wrote about SNCC and everything.
Can you explain for people who may not know what you meant about white women and black men?
Oh, yeah. Well, especially in the rural areas, but in the cities also, the deadly combination for reasons of psychotic behavior in the white community was the combination of a white woman and a black man. And by then, black men had been charged, at least for more than 100 years, with raping white women. And I had experienced in my youth some very famous cases like Willie McGee, cases of people who were lynched from jail, and usually because they were accused of having raped a white woman. And it's possible that maybe some rapes did occur somewhere along the line, but the famous cases were, in fact, white women and black men who had had relationships. And then for some reason, the white woman betrayed the black man, either out of fear herself or being forced by her family or her whatever. And Willie McGee was one of those cases where he'd had a long-term relationship with this white woman, and then they charged rape, and he ended up being lynched.
I think he was actually put to death.
Wasn't he taken out of the jail?
I think that was.
But maybe that was somebody
I think
else.
you're combining it with Mac Parker.
Oh, maybe with Mac Parker. Okay, well, they're both in Mississippi.
And they both ended up dead.
Yeah.
Because of their relationship.
Yeah.
But I think one was
Maybe Willie McGee.
convicted
Yeah.
with the death
Okay.
penalty.
Okay. Thank you. So anyway, in the rural areas, we were anathema. White women were anathema, and our book is full of examples about just walking along the road with a black man could mean that he would die. He would die. So you had in your mind, I mean, I think for white women who didn't deal with this, they were in super denial. And especially, I never went to Southwest Georgia, by the way, but according to the stories that we've told and the book, I mean, Sherrod was a maniac about this. Sherrod, I mean, viewed the white women as sort of charges that were about to be detonated, you know, and very strict rules. You can't go past this street for a week. You can't do this. You can't do that. To make sure they didn't wander off somewhere and end up getting somebody in severe trouble.
And so Charles Sherrod was SNCC's project director in Southwest Georgia, and Southwest Georgia was unusual in some of SNCC's projects because it was explicitly interracial. He recruited whites and blacks to work.
Right.
Can you describe Jim Foreman and Julian Foreman and what they were like?
Well, I'm gonna get weepy here because they were my special ones, and they're both gone now. Jim was an amazing person. I really think that historians who write about him, who didn't know him and who didn't interview people who knew him, have misconstrued his character. First of all, he didn't suffer fools gladly, number one. He was highly intelligent. I mean, extremely intelligent. He was very cultured. He was a French speaker. He spoke French. He read books from Africa before anybody ever heard of Africa. But he had very few what they call common social skills. He didn't chat. He was not a chatter. He was not an ass-kisser. He was not somebody, he was not going to sit there and pass the time of day. He got to the heart of things. He got to the meat of things. He invented the concept of friends of. And now this is a concept that has been replicated all over the world. Forget all over the United States, all over the world. He knew in his mind, I described the switchboard in his mind, but he also, here was Atlanta, and everything else was this wheel. Atlanta was the hub, it was the wheel. He invented the concept of support groups which did not do policy. They did not make policy. It was the center that made the policy. The support groups had the option of supporting or not supporting, but they did not have any other option. They did not. And now Miss Baker was really responsible for keeping SNCC autonomous, but she did it bad. She was protected, not protected. Her work was extended by Foreman, and Foreman insisted on that. Can we stop for a second? Okay, so Foreman, I'm sure it was his idea that all of these field secretaries would come off the field being everything but the main office, writing these affidavits, what he called affidavits. Now, they weren't legal affidavits in any sense. They were statements, basically. And that's what I did as a volunteer. People would come off the field, they would sit next to me, and I would type, and they would speak. And at the time, I was a very fast typist, very inaccurate typist. And
You say inaccurate?
Inaccurate. And if I made a mistake, I didn't stop, I didn't correct, I just put an X on it and just kept going. So I am able to tell what I typed now, 50 years later, because nobody else was sloppy like that. But I was really fast, so I could type as fast as somebody could speak. And then he sent them off. He sent them off to Robert Kennedy. And this is what's going on now. And the idea was that there was enough on the books already in the 1957 Civil Rights Act, where all these registrars could have been sitting in jail all of this time.
And the registrars, these are like voter registration?
Voter registration people in charge. And we kept sending them off. Do we want you to be aware of that? And I don't even remember where the letters are. The letters are all in the SNCC papers, I'm sure. That was one of the things I did. Let's see, he didn't have small talk, but when he made a human contact with you, it was like a laser beam. I found him very, very attractive in a very, not an atypical way. He had a wonderful smile. As a dentist's daughter, I noticed everybody's teeth without fail. He had wonderful teeth. He smiled. And he had a good sense of humor, but he rarely, if ever, he didn't initiate the humor. I think he appreciated people's humor. And he was constantly exasperated. And he never hid that at all. And his famous gesture, when people would talk, he would go like this. This meant, wind it up. Wind it up. So I had a couple of narrow escapes when he was present, and which is, of course, one of the many reasons I loved him so much. Once we were in Greenwood, Mississippi, not the summer of '64, the summer before that, and it was the occasion of Bob Dylan and the Folk Festival. And on the way out, there were 2 or 3 cars, interracial cars, and we were all stopped by the cops. It was at night, and it was on or near a railroad track. That's all I remember. And the cops made us, everybody get out, and we had to put our hands up on the hood of the car, and he handled it. I don't remember what he said. He was very calm, very, very calm. And I don't know what they said to him, and he dealt with it. That's the way I felt about him. I had total confidence in him. That's why I bitterly reject some of these historians saying that he was unstrung in some way or something. When I dealt with him, when we were in extremis, he was deathly calm. His instinct was absolutely right. He wasn't provocative, but he was very dignified. He was very contained, self-contained. He didn't pop off, he didn't scream, he didn't do anything like that, as has been portrayed. I had truly total confidence. If he said to me, it's okay to do this, go walk out here and go across that street, and there's a car coming, but I know you're all right, I probably would have done it. I just had total confidence in him. So that was one time. And then in Danville, when we were almost all killed again at a demonstration, when they were getting ready to hose us down and beat us up, he saved us. He realized it was going to be a disaster. And he got up and he went to the police chief and he said, do you realize what's going to happen here? I think those were his actual words. And behind his back, he sort of motioned us all to leave.
Can you describe the situation?
Yeah, so here we were in this wretched little town, which was lived and died by the mill, by the Dan River Mills Company. And black community had been struggling there to desegregate. And the community was taking a big hit. And SNCC went in there, and he sent me up there to write a pamphlet. See, that was his idea. Who would think about that, writing pamphlets? You see? Now, when he wrote a pamphlet, the pamphlet wasn't only, we'll just do it for history's sake, even though he believed in that. But he knew exactly what he was going to do with it. He was going to print it, he was going to distribute it, he was going to send it here to the north, to that. I mean, he had plans, big plans. So we were out there on these steps. Okay, can we stop for a second? Because there were about 40 people out there on the steps of this horrible city hall. And right across the street were all these deputized drunks and God knows who else. And they had the fire hoses across. I had already been knocked down by the fire hoses. And
Had people been hospitalized?
yes, people had been hospitalized. It's in the previous demonstration. There were two demonstrations. One was when we were praying by the jail, and they came out and they turned the fire hoses on us, and then later on, that's when I was hit over the head by this cop. And that's the picture that Danny Lyon took, where Foreman is sitting next to me. He's taking an affidavit. And I am talking about being hit over the head, and unfortunately, I'm sitting in this position. People think I'm posing as a model, you know, but it was actually I was holding my head. That was number one. Number two,
So how did you get hit?
by this cop who hit me. I was on my hands and knees. I weighed 106 pounds. I had no purse. It was disappeared. I didn't have any shoes, washed away. And this guy came and just out of total unnecessary sadism hit me over the head with his stick. Okay, and that's when I said, you know, that they say that seeing stars is an expression. It's not an expression, because I actually saw lights going off in my brain. I'm sure that he damaged some blood vessels in my brain, and that's what I was seeing. So not to be outdone, we went back. And that was the other thing about SNCC. You always go back. Wherever people are in the most danger, you go to them. We're like the fire department. It was like the fire department. And then if something bad happens, you go back. You do something that shows that you're not afraid, that you're going to continue. That was the whole SNCC methodology. And that's probably why we had such a reputation for good and ill, you know, that we were not, that SNCC was intemperate and hot-headed and so forth. So the going back was the community went back to City Hall, and they vowed that they would stay there for, you know, day and night if necessary. We lasted about 8 hours. My favorite memory of lasting is that Foreman, here we were all sitting on the steps. He said, he must have thought to himself, these people are going to go stir crazy just sitting there all day. I have to do something. He says, now we're going to have a workshop about Black history. And he went up and down the stairs. Now, who was Harriet Tubman? Tell me who was Harriet Tubman. And people would answer. He actually got them involved. He had been a teacher, you know, in Chicago. And so then they arrayed all of this hardware in front of us, and I was really scared, really, really scared. And I was sitting on the steps holding onto this rail with both my hands like this, and I remember thinking to myself, this is probably it. Because the idea was they were going to wash us down the steps with the hoses and then come and kill us with the sticks. And I would have sat there. I would have sat there. I mean, people have asked me, I mean, it was inconceivable to get up. How could I get up? How could I possibly? Aside from the fact that I was the only white person in the group, how could I possibly get up? I mean, who had the option to get up? You don't have an option. You know, you got there on your own 2 feet, you're going to stay there with everybody. So that's when Foreman came up, and he distracted the police chief, and behind his back he went like this. This meant get up and get the hell out of there. And we did. We got up. Very dignified, and we left. So I consider that twice he saved my life. If he had been in any way intemperate or off the wall in Mississippi when we were stopped that night, who knows what would have happened. And then in Danville, we knew what was going to happen. But you see, he had the stature to know when it was time to retreat. And he was not a crazy hothead, because if he had been, he would have just said, oh, okay, so we'll have 4 or 5 people killed out here today. And he didn't. He wouldn't do that. So I was incredibly fond of him. I just loved him. And he was also brave in other ways, you know. Like who is brave enough to buy 20 cars at once, you know? And just the idea of having the money. That was $2,000 a car, by the way, in those days. So he said to himself, I can do this. who knows if we only had $40,000 in the bank. We might have said, now is the time. He was brave. He was brave in that way. And then he put up with all sorts of unbelievable people, as we well know. You know, I mean, really, the SNCC people as a group were definitely, what should I say, exceptional in all respects. And he put up with a lot of divas, a lot of divas. So I had nothing but respect for him, nothing. And he's never been treated properly. And to think that he was reduced to that person in the movie, in Selma, you know, it was totally bizarre, a totally bizarre portrayal of him. You know, makes me feel bad. It makes me feel bad to read books just, you know, recently, that he was petulant, that he was jealous, but no. Wrong guy, wrong guy. And again, he certainly was not flawless by any means. And he could be definitely very brusque, very brusque. But he would look at you, he'd tell you the truth. He would tell you the truth. No, you didn't do that right. You know, no, you didn't do that right. And I don't remember that he spared himself either, you know. So and then of course what happened to him was very sad. Now all the time that I knew him really well up until 1967. So I knew him well from 1961, the fall of 1961, to the spring of 1967. All that time, I did not know that he had had a psychiatric history. I didn't know that he had had a breakdown as a young man. There was absolutely nothing to indicate in any one of his dealings that he had ever had any problem. I don't think I was, I certainly, you know, was not a nurse then or anything, but I think I was pretty sensitive to weird people, you know, like 5 minutes, within 5 minutes. He wasn't like that. He was not like that. He showed no sign of psychiatric problems whatsoever. And then he crashed, and then he had a breakdown. Now, whether it's hard to believe that it was not a result of accumulated stress and accumulated trauma, because he was in a very responsible period for many years. And considering that he had had a previous breakdown, I suppose it's not surprising. Now, Dinky managed to get him back. She took him to Puerto Rico. And in that period, Liz Sutherland worked with him on his book. He came back, and I think he had altogether 3 breakdowns. And his final breakdown, I remember somebody telling me, who was a medical professional, that with the final breakdown, he had 2 options then. He was going to deconstruct completely, and then he would be able to be rehabilitated through therapy and medication and restore his personality, or without intervention, he was going to level off at some chronic state. And he, at that point, refused treatment. And that's exactly what happened, is he leveled off at a chronic state and became a totally different person. And this is the person who was talking about class warfare, who became this lapdog of the Democratic Party. And I remember having a knockdown, drag-out fight with him about Ed Koch, the mayor, whom I loathed and despised. And he was giving some sort of a reason why it's important to support Ed Koch. Oh my God. And then we became distant. you know, I mean, I cared about him. He'd come and visit me. He even stayed at my house once. He by that time, and when he was in his very sick period, he was convinced that he was being poisoned. He refused to eat anything with me. We'd go to a restaurant, he wouldn't eat. And I just said to him, if you're afraid that you're being poisoned, give me the food, I'll eat it first. And if nothing happens to me, then you can eat it. I mean, I just treated it like, well, okay, this is what you think, let's try that. And he ended up, well, everybody knows how he ended up. He ended up in Washington. He was extremely bizarre. He was a great man. He has not been treated like a great man in all these years of historiography. Nope. And I am totally convinced we would have had a collection of extremely brilliant people who would have been all over the place if it hadn't been for him. I mean, he invented the hub, the wheel and the hub, and he was standing right there, right in the center of the hub. And I mean, he invented, the campus travelers. He invented, I said, the friends groups. And it was all to serve the rural areas. That was all, we didn't put it in those terms, but now looking back, that's what it was. We were all serving the work. And that's what his model was, because that's what he did in his life. I don't believe, I mean, I think he took vacations. He certainly didn't care about clothes. There was nothing that he did. He didn't care about food. He didn't care about any of that. He was very ruthless about publicity. He wanted publicity for the work. I don't remember anything where he wanted publicity for himself. He wasn't like that.
You mentioned, I think he was able to get him through the first, and that.
She got him through twice.
And can you say who she was in this context?
Oh yes, well, she was his virtual wife, the mother of his two children, both of whom are accomplished. James Foreman Jr. is a professor at Yale, and the younger son, Shaka, is an actor and a teacher in California. So it was a long series of a heart-rending thing to watch. And I remember Betty and I went to see him a couple of months before he died. And he was living in this sort of rehab home after surgery. And then he had an obsession that Aretha Franklin was a Native American. Okay. And that's all he would talk about, was Aretha Franklin and being a Native American. And I looked at him, and he said, and I'm a Native American too. And I remember looking at him, I said, really? And he showed a little flash of his old self. He said, yeah, I'm telling you, yeah, I'm telling you. But that disappeared. And then we had a big party for him, when he was 75. But that was before he had stabilized at that point. He was like your chronic eccentric person. He didn't have big ups, he didn't have big downs. But he stabilized at a level that was a different person, and I don't know the technical name for that. But his politics were different. He didn't have any great passion left. He had spent it all. He gave himself to us. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people who don't realize what a gift that was. So.
And for people who don't know SNCC's history, he really is the person who's the executive secretary for when SNCC was building the infrastructure to support people working in the field, and held that position until sometime in '65 when he was moved on to a different position.
Yeah, but he was still very much in the leadership.
Right.
And yeah.
And he wanted a different person to be in that position.
Yeah, and then Ruby Doris came in there.
save it.
Well, all I remember Pete Seeger was there.
So
Pete
this
Seeger
is
was
the festival
in Greenwood
in
in
1963.
63. I remember Bob and I were supposed to take Pete Seeger around, okay? And Bob Dylan was at the festival. Danny Lyon did several photographs of him singing there. And it was out on a big field. And he sang songs that were fabulous and totally incomprehensible, it seemed to me, to the audience. He was singing, I remember he sang a song that I totally loved and agreed every word of, which was "With God on Your Side," with God on our side, to a group of people whose religious faith meant everything to them and that had held them together for 300 years. And here he was singing "With God on Your Side." I mean, I don't know what people thought of him. I don't know what they made of him. I think that's where I might have met the Green family first. I don't remember how long we stayed there. I mean, we were only there a few days, but enough, of course, to get into trouble, possibly with the cops.
Was this your first sort of foray into the more rural South, away from the quote, safety of Atlanta?
I'm trying to think. I had only been in the rural South in the white side in Alabama through Bob's family. I had not been in the black side.
Was this before or after Danville?
Well, that's what I'm trying to remember. It seems to me it was after Danville. I think Danville was June. We got married in August, so it must have been somewhere around July. What a time to have a festival in July in Mississippi. In Greenwood. Or was it the summer of 63?
It was 63,
Am I right?
but I'm not sure when in 63.
Yeah.
I just don't remember the
Yeah,
exact
we can find that out. Well, I don't remember making a distinction between rural Mississippi and urban Mississippi. I remember the "Welcome to the Magnolia State" sign, and when you saw that sign, your heart went to your feet, and it didn't matter where you were going. And I think I only ended up being in Jackson maybe twice, so that was the only urban area. I didn't consider where we were in Greenwood to be urban, quite. To me, the whole place was like a nightmare, a living nightmare. And that whole summer was a nightmare, definitely a nightmare.
I'm going to you're talking about summer 64 as a whole.
Yeah.
I want to backtrack a little, and the last time we were talking about your chronology, you were working for the Southern Regional Council and volunteering with SNCC.
That's right.
And at a certain point, you moved from the SRC
Right.
to SNCC.
Right.
What was it like? I mean, what was it like to work at the one versus the other?
Oh, well, the SRC was, just a regular, office situation. Jane and I both were, well-paid clerical workers. She already at least had a part of a master's. I was a college graduate. I think we were doing, paper pushing. I don't know exactly what we were doing. I mean, I was still ostensibly, keeping track of the sit-in movement and statistics and all of that. Now we're back to this winter of 61, 62. And at some point, the FBI came and questioned Les Dunbar, who was the head of SRC then, questioned him about me. He told me. This is what he told me. And they apparently came with a photo of me somewhere. I mean, I never saw the photo. And I don't know if I ever asked Les Dunbar about it, but I always had some hopes for what that photo could have been. And I hoped that it was of me at a Paul Robeson concert. That's what I hoped, that they had a photo of me. Anyway, so he fired me. Now, I had been talking to Foreman about Foreman had asked me to come on the staff, but there was no money at the time. And I said, well, I might as well stay here and get my salary paid, and I'll come and work at night. So that's what I did. And of course, my life ended up being in the evenings at SNCC. But I still had, friends, and Jane was still at SRC. And we lived together. So it was all kind of a tidy thing. Then the FBI came, and then he claimed, now this was all from him, he claimed that they had come and that 2 or 3 months later he had decided that I was now redundant. And that there was no point in paying me a salary to clip articles. They could get anyone to clip articles. Or they could get a service, a clipping service. That's what they had in those days, is a clipping service. So he called me in and he fired me. So I went to Foreman and I said, okay, now's your chance. You can put me on the staff. So he said, okay. I think he had started asking me around the winter. And if I had been him as an administrator, I definitely would have hired me. Because there were, first of all, I did anything. Put me at the mimeograph machine for 4 hours, I'd do it. I was just so thrilled to be there, whatever I could do. And I was, by then, I was skilled I could put out a newsletter, and I could write letters, and I could write affidavits, and I could do all of this stuff. Many years later, in fact, I think it might have been at his memorial. I'm not positive, but Les Dunbar showed up. And I took a lot of, this you might want to, well, I'll tell this story. I did take some immoderate pleasure in introducing my daughter, Margaret, to Les Dunbar and saying, this is the man who fired me when the FBI came. Now, he claimed that I was redundant and that the FBI had nothing to do with that, and you could possibly give him some credence in that, because he didn't fire me the next day. He fired me 2 or 3 months later. And he didn't tell me that they had been there until he fired me. So you could possibly say that. On the other hand,
Wasn't.
on the other hand, I'll just say that. And I did, this was many years later. And
He also fired Jack Minnis.
did he?
Yeah, who also then came over to SNCC after being fired by the SRC. So SNCC got some really good people fired by the SRC.
Yes. Oh my God, we don't have time to even go into some of these characters like Jack and people like that. Well, you said that Jane Bond said that I was fired because I participated in a demonstration about the Cuban Missile Crisis that was organized by Howard Zinn. And I said maybe that's the photo that the FBI had. Now, they did have my name, I know that, because I think Howard told me that I think there were 23 of us, they knew every single person's name. Who was
Howard Zinn.
Yeah, Howard Zinn told me. So that's possible. I don't know what the photo was. And I said, to give him credit, maybe. But on the other hand, if I had an employee that the FBI came about, I wouldn't wait 3 months. I would discuss it with them right away. So there's something off there.
Yeah. So when you started working with SNCC full-time,
Yeah.
there were a couple of things I know you were working on. One was the Civil Liberties Conference,
Yeah.
or workshop.
Yeah.
And then you were also working with Julian Bond on
Yeah.
communications.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that work?
Okay, so this is going to be hard, so I have to talk about Julian now. Well, let's see. I started working with Julian the winter of 61, 62. And right away, we meshed. And probably you couldn't get 2 more different people because, I'm sure I was hard to deal with. I think I was hard to deal with by some of the people there because, when I said I'm going to be somewhere at 9 o'clock, I was there at 9 o'clock. I mean, that was the hardest thing for me to adjust to was, we'd say, oh, we're going to meet at 9 o'clock on Thursday, and it might be 9 p.m. on Tuesday. I found that very hard to deal with. Now, I don't know if I interpreted it as a Southern way of life, but it might have been anything but a frenzied New York way of life. I'm willing to grant that. So we had different ways. I mean, I was, really hard driven, and he was much more relaxed. Relaxed meaning coming in later, leaving earlier, then coming back. But we really got along well, extremely well, and he was well known to love gossip. He loved gossip. He loved funny stories about people. The interesting thing is that when I needed a confidant about personal matters, which I will not go into, who did I pick but Julian to talk to? And that was early on. And I've been thinking since he died, why I did that. There was something about him. I trusted him. I don't believe that whatever I told him, and I know what I told him, that he ever, ever, ever mentioned that to another living soul. So there was a lot of respect there. And of course, he happened to be one of the funniest people who ever lived. And I'm very fortunate. I just had lunch with Pam, his widow, last Saturday. And I'm very fortunate that I have a lot of his emails. I don't think I ever destroyed one email that he ever wrote to me. So someday I have to get them all together and print them out and give them to her. So he was also really unique. One time, I think it was probably around 1963, I said to him, Julian, let's write a book. And of course, the two of us, we were so far from writing a book as being able to fly to the moon. Because one thing you needed was to have all of the pieces of paper together, in one spot, filed and kept. We didn't have that. And I'm thinking, if we had written a book, wouldn't that have been great? 1963, would have been 1963. So I loved working with him. I'm not going to give you the actual incident, but one thing that was very meaningful to me was that he defended me inside SNCC because I was being criticized for being the kind of person who got there at 9 o'clock and was irritated when other people didn't get there at 9 o'clock. And Julian did not like conflict. He was very conflict averse. So when he took up for me in a staff meeting, that was very meaningful to me. I never forgot that. So I am finding it hard to realize that he's gone. And it's not that I saw him so much, maybe I saw him every year, but just knowing that he was there was something meaningful to me. And when I got that email that he had died, somebody sent it to me, I think it was Dorothy Burlage. She had seen it on the Associated Press. She was up like at 4 o'clock in the morning or something. When I woke up in the morning, I saw it, and I just couldn't. I said, no, Julian. So they were both totally different characters, completely different characters. I was lucky to work with them, really lucky. We didn't have too many moments of a high danger, like I did with Jim. Julian was cautious. He didn't put himself in too many moments of high danger, although he did travel to Mississippi quite a bit, so there must have been some high danger there. So that's what I would say.
How did you put out the student voice, and how did you work with reporters?
Well, I think I've been trying to remember. I remember laying out dummies of the student voice, but I think Julian brought it to the guy who put out the black newspaper, whose name I don't remember.
Atlanta Inquirer?
It might have been, yes, somebody at the Atlanta Inquirer. We did not put it, we didn't do the type ourselves. We didn't set the type. And we didn't have the ability to make the photos. But I remember doing many dummies.
Did the two of you write all the stories?
Yes, we wrote all the stories. And later on, we also tried to teach staff people and the summer volunteers both about how to deal with the press. And he and I really saw eye to eye on how to deal with the press, because there were some press people that we really liked a lot. And even if we didn't like them, we always told them the truth. And that's something that we taught the volunteers. And since then, I've always taught people. I said, if you have a demonstration, don't say there were 500 people when there were 42 people. Say there were 42 people. Because the guy who covers it, the next time, he's not going to come if he knows. Now, nobody taught us that in journalism school. Actually, neither of us ever went to journalism school, but I did run the newspaper, and I think he was on the newspaper, if I'm not mistaken, or with the newspaper at Morehouse. I'm not sure.
He actually, when he left Morehouse, he worked with the Atlanta Inquirer when they were being formed.
Yeah. So we liked these guys, and they trusted us, and we had really, looking back, a unique and wonderful relationship with them. I mean, a lot of them gravitated towards him. He was, very beautiful and very charismatic. And I was this New York girl, They weren't going to be dwelling over me, although Fred Powledge became quite fond of me at the end. But he was very charismatic. He was great to be around. He was, we did these live phone conversations. Well, they were live, but then they taped them. And even then, he was a master at that, 10 times, 100.
Explain what you mean by that.
Well, somebody would interview us over the phone. And I was, I was good. I was earnest and everything. He was witty and funny. I mean, he had to be one of the funniest people who ever lived. And he could just knock off these witticisms like it was nothing. The younger he was, the quicker he was. So when most people saw him when he had already was down half his speed. You can imagine what he actually was when he was 22. And we were born on the same date. Now, I mean, the same day, not the same year. I'm 2 years older. And so they knew if they talked to Julian, they would get a good quote. So they would always get a good quote. Then they would get the truth from us, and they would get what actually happened. And if we didn't know what happened, we'd say, we don't know what happened. These are all things that have flown by the wayside, So they were reasonably sure they didn't have to go double checking and triple checking and so. And then we called them constantly, and we sent press release. Now, we had, if I've got this correct, I'm not sure I do, we identified black people deliberately. Of course, we didn't say black then, we said Negro. Now it looks a little strange, but we did it deliberately because we wanted people to know that there were black people in the front of this. So when people got arrested, it was especially important. Now, I'm not sure that really came through to a lot of people wondering, because we didn't say white. White was the default. But we wanted people to know that there were black people in the leadership. I hope some historian will write that down somewhere, because it will look definitely strange in 20 or 30 years, why an organization that was black-led kept, making a whole point only about the race of the person when it was a black person. But there was a reason for that. And we did that always.
I want to jump ahead a little bit, but so I know that you worked in the Atlanta office through the summer of '63. You and Bob Zellner were married in August? 63?
Yes, we were married in August. But to say through the summer is not quite right, because part of that was in Danville. And then, if we got the dates right, another part of it was in Greenwood at the music festival. So I wasn't
but you're
based out of
the Atlanta
absolutely
office.
yes, and got married in Atlanta.
And then you and Bob relocate to Boston.
Yes.
And he's in graduate school, and
Yes.
you create a Boston Friends of SNCC.
No, there was a Boston Friends of SNCC, and I created a Northeast Regional Office of SNCC.
Okay.
And I always made it, nobody paid the slightest bit of attention, but I always made a big thing about that, because this was not a Friends of SNCC group. I was a staff member, and I took leadership directly from Atlanta, and I was a staff member.
And did most of the Friends of SNCC not have a staff member? They were...
That's right. Many of them had volunteers. Some of them only had volunteers.
And so then, like Chicago and New York, are those
I think
also SNCC offices as opposed to Friends of SNCC?
Well, it's sort of mixed. I don't know. You'd have to ask people who worked there. But there were staff members there, too.
I guess that was what I was...
Yeah.
And so you're in Boston, and I know one of the things that you did was interview people who were going to be volunteers in the summer project and decide whether they should to accept the applications. And then you went to Greenwood that summer of '64 as part of the national office in Greenwood. And at some point you're in Newark?
No.
You and Bob?
No.
I thought...
We went back to Cambridge, where we were living. He went back to school in '64, '65. I ran the SNCC office, continued to run the SNCC office there. I mean, the Northeast Regional, the Friends of SNCC, whatever you want to call it, in Boston. And got pregnant. And then I resigned from that particular work, but not from the SNCC staff, in the spring of '65. Then my daughter was born. We went back to Atlanta in the fall of '65. And then we took a year's leave of absence. And Bob was the campaign manager for the first anti-Vietnam War candidate in the country, whose name was Bob Cook, who was a Yale professor.
And so you were in New Haven?
We were in New Haven.
And that must have been what I was...
Yeah, we were in New Haven, but one or the other of us always went to staff meetings. So we were on leave, but we were still going to staff meetings. We were still involved in staff discussions.
Can I ask, so when you said that you resigned from running the Northeast Regional, but you continued to do work, what kind of work were you doing?
Oh, I don't remember if I did any work when we were still there. When we came back to Atlanta, I worked. I brought the baby to work.
Okay, I just went, because
And then when I came back, that was the winter of '65, if I'm not mistaken. The spring of winter of '65, '66, that's when Stokely asked me to work on the Panther. Now, while we were on leave, as I say, Bob always went to staff meetings, and I did too if I was able. But at the time in '65, it was the custom you didn't work after your seventh month. Now you work right up until the minute you give birth.
And is that when you resigned,
Yes.
when you were 7
Yeah,
months
but I didn't
pregnant?
resign from SNCC. I just stepped down from the office. Bob took over running the office.
While he was in school, or was he?
Yeah, but he was pretty, and never graduated. I mean, never finished. And so she was born in July. It was like late May, he had already finished his semester. And he started running the SNCC office.
And so she's born in the spring.
She's born in July.
She's born in July.
Yeah,
And that fall you're back in Atlanta.
that's right.
And at what point do you take the leave of absence? Is it
It was probably shortly thereafter, maybe the winter. And then we worked through the election, which was, again, November, I guess, of 66. And
Right.
then we stayed there a couple of months after that. Then we went south, and we were getting ready to go back to work with SNCC. Because by that time,
Were either of you at the SNCC meeting December 66 at Peg Leg Bates?
Bob was there,
Bob was there.
but I wasn't there.
Can you tell us what he said about that meeting?
Oh, well, he said, that white people were asked to leave. And the only thing I remember was that most of the white people there had abstained. And that as I remember, I don't know if the Library of Congress is interviewing him, but he apparently abstained. I should say that the most coherent recounting of that meeting, which if you get 10 people, they have 11, versions, is Petita. Liz Sutherland's version in our book is the most coherent. And I have heard people say that white people were never asked to leave SNCC. And I have heard multiple votes, each one contradicted the other, the last one at 2 o'clock in the morning, and so forth and so on. Hers is the most coherent one, and I think is probably the most accurate one. But in any case, when we went back the first time, which was 65, before we left for New Haven, already there was discussion about SNCC becoming all black.
Were you part of those discussions, or do you have a sense, just
Yes.
a sense they're going on?
No, they weren't. Well, the substantive discussions were not conducted with white people there, but it was not a secret, and people were saying, yes, I remember, I don't remember people's names, but I remember being in meetings where people would say, yes, we think we want to go all black. Yeah.
And what were you thinking at the time?
Oh, I was beside myself. Now that you've heard part of my whole story, I went down to marry the movement. Oh, I was completely beside myself.
And you've got an infant daughter.
Totally beside myself. Yes, and then I said to Bob, I am not disappearing without a trace. So we have to write something. After all, who told us to write everything and keep everything was Foreman, right? And so we were at that moment, I think it was May 67. And we had been in Alabama with this baby, roosting there until we figured out what was going to happen to us, because in the meantime, Ann and Carl had said that they wanted us to come and work for SCIF, the Southern Conference Educational Fund. And we wanted to get, as I remember, straightened out with SNCC before we made a decision. Our vast preference was to stay in SNCC. And so we talked about it, and we decided that we would agree to work in the white community, but we could not agree to surrendering our vote. In other words, we would insist on being treated as regular staff members in the organization, and we would work in the white community. And furthermore, that to do otherwise was wrong. that you can't organize white people in a vacuum, that we know what happens then. And I wrote that statement, and actually I read it now and then. I have to say it is extremely well done. It is well done, because it right away says we are not doing this out of sentiment, and we're not doing that out of longevity. After all, Bob was one of the first field secretaries, period, and the very first white field secretary. And I came on in June of '62. I outdated many of the people who wanted us to leave. I was there before them. And we said we were willing to do that. Now, looking back, there was only one place in Alabama I think we could have survived. And that was this little artsy-craftsy town called Fairhope. And Bob's family lived in Daphne, Alabama, which was near Mobile. And Fairhope was further inland, maybe, 30 or 40 miles. And Fairhope had a reputation of tolerating artists who lived there and more unconventional people. And I felt maybe we had a chance there. So no, I was very, very afraid. And I said to Bob, I don't want to go there. And he said, oh, it'll be okay, it'll be okay. And I said, I'm afraid we're going to be killed there. And fortunately, his mother intervened. And his father had a church, but he had lost several churches because he had turned into a liberal by that time, and he had lost many churches. I don't remember how many. And his mother said to him, not to me, to him, I don't want you to come here to Alabama, because whatever you do, we will pay the price, and who knows what will happen to us. And so he wouldn't listen to me at all, but he listened to her. In any case, if SNCC had accepted it, we would have gone to Alabama. With his mother, without his mother. And the only place, as I said, I could have thought was Fairhope. Now, how long we would have lasted in Fairhope, I have no idea. It's conceivable to me that I, at some point, would have said, I can't live like this, goodbye. I mean, everything was up for grabs. And how it was going to actually work day to day, I don't know. We would have started organizing somehow in Alabama, in the white community, and then we would have gone to staff meetings somewhere where there would have been black people and white people. We would have discussed our work. Sooner or later, I think the objective would have been that we start introducing some black people to some of these white people. We would have, knowing us, we probably would have looked for situations of conflict like Laurel, like Mississippi. Who knows, I mean, after all, 50 years before this, as we can tell from Robin Kelly's book, Hammer and Hoe, that there were organizers in Alabama. And there were even interracial organizers in Alabama. And according to a story that Martha Norman Noonan told us, she was able to detect traces of that interaction many decades later. So it's up for grabs. I think that the chances were good that we would have been killed. One of us would have been killed. Or they would have thrown a bomb in the house, and they would have tried to kill us like they did the McShirleys. But I'm not sure. In any case, it did go on the record. This piece of paper did last from '67 till now.
And what was the vote?
Well, we never got it straight. We heard all kinds of various things. We heard there was one vote for us, not Foreman.
So actually, I guess I should backtrack. So you write this statement,
That's
and then
right.
Bob takes it to
That's right.
SNCC.
That's right.
What was it called then? It wasn't the executive committee.
It was the Central Committee.
The Central Committee.
Yeah.
And he presents it. Does he does he talk about it, or does he just bring the paper, the proposal?
Well, according to the minutes are written, are in Danny Lyon's book. So, as I remember, he made a presentation, and then he was asked to leave the room. And then the minutes they talk back and forth. You know, according to the minutes, people said, gee, this is a hard situation. You know, he was there, he's very brave, he's, you know, a legend, but, you know, we're moving on.
In that interim period between when you come back to Atlanta in 65 after your daughter's born, and then this moment in 67 when you make the formal proposal, do you have conversations about this with people that you were close to in SNCC, like Foreman?
Well, my overriding impression of those years was that Foreman was in deep psychic distress. Let's see, his first breakdown was in 68. Okay, so this is before his breakdown. What I remember talking to him after Peg Leg Bates, and I remember Dinky and he was sitting on a couch, I was sitting across. I said, don't tell me you agree with this. And he didn't deny it. I said, I know you don't agree with this. Yes, but you know, Dorothy. He called me Dorothy. Oh, Dorothy, you know. He didn't. He was in deep psychic distress. I think he understood that where people were, he couldn't hold them back. He didn't want to be in a position of holding them back because he knew it would undermine his own leadership abilities. He was deeply uncomfortable. I think my impression is that he definitely would have preferred an interracial organization led by black people, which is what we had. Not an interracial organization where we took on 80 white people from the Mississippi Summer. That was untenable. That was totally untenable. I think that was his comfort zone. I think he was basically a class guy. He was for class unity around class. And I think that's where his comfort zone was. But he couldn't do anything to stop it, and he wouldn't. But the fact that he was not out there gung-ho meant, you know, something to people. You know, he was making a statement by not making a statement. And he was in difficulty. I think Julian also. Now, I don't remember but Julian left relatively early on. I mean, I don't know. Do you know what year he left?
Well,
He left by
conjunction with
65.
the election.
But it was before that. It was before the election.
Yeah, then I have.
Yeah.
I saw a press release about him leaving SNCC, and I thought, I don't know, he framed it in terms of he looked up one day and realized he hadn't been doing any work, so he shouldn't. But I don't know the timing of that.
I don't know if that was the only reason, and I'm certainly not saying to anybody who ever watches this, you know, that SNCC died because white people left. I do think that the fact that whatever happened to SNCC, causing it to disappear in 3 years from then, was a horrible tragedy for the United States and has had a deep, deep impact every decade since then. And it was truly unique. It definitely was a magnet for the absolute best, most creative, most innovative, most intelligent, bravest people. And we've needed it desperately ever since. I myself think that what happened, the fracturing, was a factor. But I think there were other factors, and I think deep disillusionment following Atlantic City was a tremendous factor. And I think, well, it sounds very simple-minded, but in a way it was people's faith in democracy, lowercase d, that did them in, because it didn't prepare them for what was going to happen. And if you look back on it and you can just see, oh, you say to yourself, oh, we should have gone into Atlantic City saying, and I was not in Atlantic City, we should have said, maybe this will work, but probably it won't. And next month we're, but we were not thinking about that.
Bob Moses said to me that he thinks things might have moved forward better if there had just been a planned debriefing for the summer project students at the end of the summer, something to bring people together to debrief and then move on back to wherever, I don't know. So what did you and Bob do, you and Bob Zellner do at that point when the proposal was rejected?
So when it was rejected, we told Ann and Carl that we were coming to work for SCEF. So we moved to New Orleans, where I lived for the next 17 years. And we worked there for 5 years. Worked there and for SCEF for 5 years. And Ann and Carl had wanted us to take over the organization. And they had this idea that we would replicate their behavior and their division of labor. And they had 3 children. One later died. But their idea of how they conducted themselves was each one was 6 months on the road, while the other, was fanning the home fires. I absolutely did not want to live like this, and I felt that it had a very, very serious effect on their children, and I was not about to do that with my children. And furthermore, since Bob had very little administrative ability, I did not want to end up running the whole thing, which I would have had to end up doing. And he would have been on the road doing the things that he could do well, making the contacts, making the speeches. I would be home raising the 2 children and running an organization by myself. No, thank you. So we stayed on this project. And
so how did you do it then?
Well, I stayed home and worked from home. And Ann did me a tremendous favor. She insisted that I get paid separately so that I would have Social Security in the future. And I should think about her every month when I get my Social Security check, because it's thanks to her. Because they were 5 years there where we would have had nothing, on the books. And Bob he traveled. He went to Mississippi. He worked on the Woodcutters project and the grassroots organizing work. I stayed at home and I did stuff from home. I did all the things that I've always done. I wrote pamphlets. I wrote things. I have it down in that piece of paper. And then finally, after we had been in civil rights, we had been professional civil rights workers for 10 years. I said to Bob, we have to become regular people. I felt like we were going to levitate into the sky. Nobody was standing there saying, you better get up at 7 o'clock, you have a clock to punch. If we had gone on much longer, we wouldn't have been able to integrate back into the regular world. And there's something about long-term organizers, where they don't have regular routines. It sometimes separates them from the people who do, the people that they're organizing. So he became a carpenter. He was a carpenter, and he was able to join the union. And I went to nursing school to be a practical nurse. And then, of course, we continued doing stuff, as volunteers and some local struggles that we got involved in. But we had other work, other jobs.
So can we go back?
Sure.
So you're working, so can you tell us about the Civil Liberties Workshop that you organized in, I guess it was carried off in summer of '63, right?
Yes, I think it was the spring. It was the spring of '63. Well, that turned out to be a totally unsung but very important episode in SNCC's history. I think I'm the only one who's written about it so far. I'm sure there'll be other people down the road. It's the product of this very close relationship that Anne Braden and Miss Baker had. And they were survivors of McCarthyism. And McCarthyism was not dead. McCarthyism was very much alive at the time, although in retrospect it was waning. And I don't know when the last, well, let's see. I think the House Un-American Activities Committee was still having hearings even up to 1964, if I'm not mistaken, where the back was really broken by a group called Women's Strike for Peace. And that was in the early 60s, 61 or 62. I'd have to check that. And previously, people who were called before the Un-American Activities Committee were faced with two very unpleasant options. First of all, they had to get lawyers. Couldn't go into a hearing without a lawyer. You had two options. You could take the Fifth Amendment, which is your guaranteed constitutional right, and which the American mass media would make equivalent to be saying you were guilty. And all the mafia people took the Fifth Amendment. Anybody who didn't want to go to jail took the Fifth Amendment. Or you took the First Amendment and you had no protection whatsoever and you could be cited for contempt of Congress, which is what happened to Carl Braden and Frank Wilkinson. They went to jail for a year. So there were very few protections. Previously to this, in the 50s, flying out of my head, Charlie Jones had testified. Of SNCC.
He eventually joined SNCC, but this was
Yes.
before he joined SNCC.
Yes, before he joined SNCC. And he had been a super patriot of some kind, and he had testified. Anne was completely committed to fighting these investigating committees and fighting McCarthyism. And parenthetically, make sure I come back to this, when I was living in New Orleans, I wrote a paper when I was briefly in graduate school about the Eastland hearings that took place in 1954 against the Southern Conference Educational Fund. So in 1954 was probably the height of McCarthyism, 1954, 55, 56. And they did everything they could to smear the civil rights movement. So Anne was a survivor of this, and Miss Baker I don't think that they ever thought of calling her, but Anne was always in danger of being called, and Carl had gone to jail for a year. So they cooked up together that it was very important to have some internal education about what SNCC was going to do if it was ever called by an investigating committee. And it turned out this was extremely important. And I think the conference went on for at least 2 days, as I remember. I have no idea what the actual process was, but I remember a lot of agonized discussion and whether SNCC could admit people without loyalty oaths, whether it had to be concerned about people's politics, volunteers' politics. By then, Al Lowenstein was around and who had already told Bob Moses, I believe, he was around the next summer. But there were people always coming up. There were always rumors and people coming up to Foreman and to Bob Moses saying, watch out, this one is a red, that one's a red, and so forth. So we had this agonizing discussion, and Bob at that time was very nervous about having white people, Bob Moses, coming in because of the danger to the local people. And he was doubly nervous about having anybody who was called a communist coming in, also for the same reason. And there was a lot of agonized discussion, but at the end, people decided that they would not cooperate. This was a stunning victory, unbeknownst to, I mean, this is totally has gone without any historic, I think I'm the first one who wrote about it. And I am convinced that there had to be an undercover agent there, and that it was transmitted to the government that if these people were subpoenaed, they would refuse to cooperate. And then, in 1963, there was still an incredible amount of goodwill in reserve in the country for the sit-in heroes, and it would not have looked good internationally to have sit-in heroes go to jail, sent by the U.S. government because they refused to talk about their views. That would have definitely looked very bad.
Wasn't one of the big issues about whether or not to, have basically a political test on letting somebody in SNCC or
Yes.
working with SNCC?
Yes. Well, that's what I've said. There was pressure about that, about people's views. They decided no, they were not going to have an oath, and furthermore, if they were called by a committee, they would not take the Fifth Amendment, they would take a First Amendment, they would go to jail. And later on, Julian told me many years later that in the 60s, or he said the 70s, he was never able to verify this because I asked him within the past couple of years about it. He said he had read somewhere that the government had 6,500 black informers all over the country. So we had to have an informer. And that person probably still, if that person's still alive, they have not been unmasked. And we still got him, somebody.
There was something that happened before that workshop. It was maybe in 62, maybe fall 62. Carl Braden was in Mississippi, and there was a lot of newspaper coverage about, red commie, I don't know how they put it, but coverage of that, and that Moses was really concerned about.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that?
I don't remember that particular thing. But I remember he was very concerned. He was very concerned. But he was never concerned from the point of view that, oh, I can't have these people around and, oh, they're going to, screw up what we're doing. It was solely because of the danger that it presented to local people. And by then, Herbert Lee had been killed. So that's a whole other story, about walking around feeling responsible. So I think it was a protective measure. And I don't know. That was the fall of 62, you said?
I think
I
so.
should be able to remember that, but I don't remember that.
Can you talk about what you were trying to do when you were interviewing people to go to the summer project?
Yes. Well, like I said in the movie, it's in the movie. We were very, very hard-headed about it. We did not want crazies, and we didn't want divas. Now, I think we succeeded pretty well, because I think of the hundreds of people who were there, I think there were a few divas, and there might have been a few crazies, but considering the high percentage that there could have been, I think we kept it down. Now, I was only in one place. I don't know what other people were doing around the country. My impression is that it ranged from being very hands-on to very loose, and that there were some places where people just said, go.
Remember how you would?
But not, we were totally rigorous,
Do you remember how
to
you did
say
it,
the
how you
least.
approached it?
Oh yes, well we had a questionnaire, which I believe was prepared by COFO. We didn't do that. See, our whole way of functioning was we were taking direction from the center, from the hub. So it would have been unheard of for me to write an application for somebody. This was written by people in Mississippi. And we interviewed every one of them personally. And usually there were two of us, a black person and a white person. And we wrote detailed reports, and who knows, I think I know where they are, but I don't know. And I'm certainly hoping that they're uncovered after I'm in my grave, because some of them were not very flattering, let's put it that way. So what we were looking for was to make sure that nobody was an adventurer, like, oh, I think I'll do something exciting, I'll go to Mississippi. We wanted people who were going to be respectful of the black communities, even if they didn't understand a thing about black communities. And the way we put it in very, very simple, concrete terms. Are you going to wear shorts to church? Those kind of examples to see how, I don't know how clever we were, because, you didn't have to be a brain surgeon, certainly not Ben Carson, to figure out, what the correct answer was. But we were also looking at them and seeing their body language and their reaction. We wanted people who would behave, and who would realize that they were going into a very dangerous situation. Now, you know that in this last reunion, a woman came up to me who I did not know at all. She said, I know you don't know. I'm talking about recently in Mississippi. She said, you don't know who I am, but you interviewed me. There were several people who came up to me. And she said, I have to say, I've never forgotten it in my whole life. I said, oh my God, what did I do? She said, you scared the hell out of me. You said, are you ready to die? So I said, oh, well, in that case, that's not so bad. So she said, so I said, you mean I didn't send you down there on false pretenses? She said, no, you didn't. She said it was one of the worst things I ever went through. She said, but the good thing is, she said, when I give an interview, I remember what you did, and I tell the truth, and I bear down on people. We did. Oh, we did. Because in my mind, I didn't also want to be responsible. Oh my God, you let this person go through. I'm sure that if we aired on the other side of caution. We probably didn't let some people go down who should have. Now, the one person I slipped up on was Abby Hoffman.
You let Abby Hoffman through?
We let Abby Hoffman through, but at that time he was wearing a suit and tie. He was a completely different person. And he, ironically, is the only one that, I'm sure I've told you this, that I know who actually went public after white people left SNCC, gnashing his teeth about how terribly he had been treated as a white person. Yes, in the Village Voice. Yes.
Was he in SNCC after this?
Well, the question was whether he ever in SNCC. By stretching that's the thing. People ask me now, was so-and-so in SNCC? So I said, well, what do you mean in SNCC? I said, do you understand that we didn't have members? Oh, what? I said, we didn't have members. We had staff. So there's a lot of mushiness about that. If you were in a project in Mississippi and you were in a Freedom School, were you in SNCC? You were in a COFO project, to be, actually accurate. But he was one of the few, he said.
But he was
and
a summer volunteer.
He was a volunteer.
Where did he work?
I don't know. But this is easy to find out. It's in the stuff, and you should definitely look up that in the Village Voice. And the other person, I think, who had bad things to say was Susan Brownmiller, if I remember. There were two of them. Now, she was not SNCC, but she had a lot of bad things to say about white people being used, and poor white people. So after all of that episode, there were press who wanted to interview us. We said no, we were never interviewed. And I just want to clarify that what happened to white people, it ends up everybody's crying over the poor white people, if we all look back, is it a surprise after what happened in Atlantic City, really? And would we have not done the same ourselves? Very likely so. So that's what always held me back from crime. I mean, I was always loyal to SNCC. But also, I can't say for 100% that I would have, if I had gone through what they went through, I don't know what I would have done. And I mean, Bob Moses' suggestion about getting all the volunteers together, that would have been helpful. It would have been helpful. I mean, you see him, Bob Moses, very sad in the movie. What's the other movie about the Freedom Summer? It's just slipped my mind.
The older one or the recent?
The older one.
Freedom on My Mind.
Freedom on My Mind. He's standing there. I've seen the film several times. He's standing there with a clipboard. He's in Atlantic City. He's keeping track of all the different delegations and the votes. And he looks at the camera and he says, if things go along the way we expect, we're going to win. So if everybody, and certainly if somebody of Bob Moses' stature thought we were going to win, was anybody going to say, hey, wait a second, what if we don't win? What are we going to do? What is the plan B? And we didn't have one. We didn't have one. Given all of that, is it any wonder? Now, some people feel, I don't know, Judy may feel, or other people may feel that becoming all black was a natural thing and needed to be done. It should have been done. I don't think I agree. I think we were a powerhouse. When you think of what we were able to do, it's not because we had all those white people, because we didn't have all those white people. I don't think until the summer of '64 we had more than 20% of the people who were white, maybe 25. I think there were some very good lessons that we taught. We taught that a black person can tell a white person what to do. That was unheard of. It was unheard of. We taught people by example that if the context changes, then people's behavior can change. That was unheard of. I tell people that we probably, for those brief years, are the only Americans who ever experienced racial equality. I mean, or maybe equality is not the right word. That we achieved, in the South African term, a non-racial community. Not because we weren't racial, because everybody knew and was conscious of that, but because the context was, if you're going to be with us, you're going to take a bullet. And you can take a bullet as a white person or a black person. It was unique, really, when you think about it. I mean, what other group was like that? So I think we taught a lot. The country is so deeply racist that whether we could have remained that way, obviously we didn't. We couldn't. And it was racism that did us in. And, you know, people have different ideas about why SNCC came to an end. There's a lot of contention about that still. I think there were many, many reasons. But the basic reason really was this is a profoundly racially disturbed country. In order to really get through it, we're going to have Black Lives Matter times 1,000,000. I mean, we're going to have to take it on every which way, culturally, socially, physically, academically, every way. Otherwise, you know, that's the vacuum. The vacuum is racism. Then there's racism. Then all kinds of people, you know, walk into the vacuum. So I can't feel sorry. I still feel sorry that SNCC is lost, that was lost. I don't know if other people do. And I think it may play out in a lot of racial ways. It may play out. there's certainly an awful lot of confusion about what happened. And you know, there was confusion right away after Peg Leg Bates. Within 2 weeks, there were debates. This vote happened, this vote didn't happen, all of that. I don't know how we would ever, I don't think there was any kind of coherent note-taking there. Doesn't seem that anybody, you know, that everybody can agree with, that everybody can adhere to. But I don't want my interview to be to end on that note, because it's not the critical thing. It's not the critical thing what happened to the poor white people, what happened to poor us. You know, that's not the critical thing. The critical thing is that I think that we showed that, without sounding hyper lowercase democratic, we showed that there is an incredible resource and reservoir of real creativity and ingenuity, certainly in the Black community and in the white community that is willing to support Black liberation. And it's there. It's still there. It's there. And it's definitely, at different times, it's going to come out. And people have hopes that each time it'll be the time that we can recreate that each time.
I've heard you say that that some of the work you're doing now, it feels to you like you're fulfilling the charge that SNCC made to white people to work in their own community.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about that?
Well, since, let's see, for 13 years I've been doing this. Mostly, you know, that's what I do in addition to my job, is work in speaking out as a Jewish person about Israel-Palestine. And I've come a long way in those 12 or 13 years and learned an awful lot. My initial impetus was to do what SNCC said to do, which we, as you can tell, we were ready to do it, we said, at least, in 1957. It never came about. 67, sorry. In the GROW project, we tried to do white organizing in a moment of crisis in Mississippi. And we say we, and I use that sort of in quotes because I was home with children and I was not traveling to Mississippi. There were several men who were doing that to different degrees of effectiveness. So I took it to heart. This is what I have to do. This is what people expect me to do. And I have to say, there are not a whole lot of SNCC people who say to me, oh, I'm going to join you. But I have yet, in 12, 13 years, to have one SNCC person ever say, I don't agree with what you're doing. And many of them have said, good for you that you're doing it, because it's tough. It's tough without having some of the benefits that SNCC had. Because even while we were right there in the middle of it, I knew, at least, I presume other people knew, that if I lived to be 1 million, would I ever be able to sit in a room with people like this? I mean, almost every one of them outdazzled the other one. And that's the other lesson, takeaway that I tell people. You know, SNCC stood everything. And in addition to having Black people telling white people what to do, it showed you that a person with a third grade education might be smarter than a PhD. This was very useful to know. There were a lot of things that were stood on their heads. And those are all carryaways. We don't have that in this movement. And I've told kids, I've brought kids lessons from those days. I've said, you have to take care of each other. You have to send people away on R&R. That's what Foreman did. Foreman invented that. He invented that. We don't have, you walk into a room and say, oh, here we are, we're all together. We can get sustenance until we go out the next time. We don't have that. Because when we're out there on the front lines with people who hate us. Hate us. Vicious and hateful people. And actually, it was one of the women in our book, one of the black women, who told me that she was in a demonstration in Israel years ago of progressive Israeli Jews. And she said the abuse they suffered there was worse than anything she ever went through in the South. And people asked me about that, and I said, well, the difference is they didn't talk to you much, they just tried to kill you. And here they abuse you, and they don't, up until now, have not tried, to kill you. But the abuse level is extremely high. So I can't say that I go home and I rarely am able to say to myself, wow, we did a great thing today. What I say is, well, we did it, at least we did it. And hopefully it's going to mean something someday. I think it is starting to mean something.
Can you tell me about Ruby Doris Smith Robinson?
Yes, I met her probably the winter of, I met her before I was on staff. I met her when we were in the loft. You know about the loft. People have forgotten about the loft. First we had the windowless cubicle, then we had the loft, then we had Raymond Street. There might have been something in between. So I met her in the loft, which was also on Auburn Avenue, I believe. And so if that's the winter of 61, 62, I don't know when she got out of jail from Rock Hill.
It would have been spring of 61.
Spring of 61. Okay, well, when she came into the office, there was a murmur because she had a tremendous reputation as being brave as a lion. In those days, brave as any man, or braver than any man.
That's how people put it?
Probably. I don't know that for sure. And so how to sum up Ruby and I? Until Ruby got sick, I think Ruby didn't really like me very much, but put up with me because I was a very hard worker. Later on, when Cynthia Fleming did her book about Ruby, she called me and she wanted an interview, and she said, the word is that I get is that you were one of the few white women that Ruby liked. So liking was different from respecting. We never socialized. I don't think we ever had 3 minutes of chit-chat. It was work. And she was very fierce, very awesome and fierce. And I, like everybody else, was afraid of her, was a little afraid of her. But there was never anything I had to be afraid of because I did my work. That was the main thing with Ruby. Are you doing your work? And I always did my work. But when Ruby got sick, then we became friends.
What was your role in SNCC?
Well, Ruby was, even without having the title to go with it, she was sort of second to foreman. And she, in modern terms, she did a lot of personnel work. And she kept track of where people were and what they were doing, what they were supposed to be doing. And she did financial planning to the extent that we had any financial planning with Foreman. He respected her a lot. I'm not sure if I would call her an even-keeled person. I don't think she was. She was very emotional, and she had obviously had trauma. I think that 30 days of chipping or breaking rocks was an unbearable trauma for her.
Well, she went to Parchman, too.
And she went to, yes, and she went to Parchman. So.
Did she ever talk about that?
Not to me. No, she never. When we became sort of friends. When the barriers came down, she was flat on her back at Beth Israel Hospital. And I came in there, and this is long before I became a nurse. Some people are afraid of sick people, and some people aren't. And the people who were afraid, they stayed away. And then there were the people who weren't, and I wasn't afraid. And we were living in New Haven then, but we would come to New York very often, and we would stay at my parents' house, and they lived 1 block from Beth Israel. So I was able to get over there a lot. And at one point, she was a holy terror in the hospital, and the nurses wanted her to do something, and she refused. She jumped out of bed, trailing all these IV things and ripping them out. She was, looking back, here she was in New York. I don't know why she was in New York week after week after week in the hospital. It's hard to believe that they couldn't have flown her home. I don't know. Here she had a little boy by then. She had a husband by then. And here, day after day after day, I think she was in there for weeks. So then Ruby was not, she became gentle. And, we talked, we laughed, we talked about, so-and-so, can you believe so-and-so's up to this? Oh, tell me about it, girl, that kind of thing.
You and Ruby Dora's gossiping.
Yes. And then Foreman would come, and the three of us, our heads would be bent over, and we would be telling funny stories. And he was very kind to her. He was very gentle with her. And I don't know, I actually spoke to her sister, whose name I can't think of right at the moment. Marianne, who is a doctor. And when we had the SNCC reunion, I think I tried to talk to her about what the medical issues were, which always was a mystery to me. I think it was a form of leukemia. It was virulent. I think she got sick. Within 2 years, she was dead. When she died, we were already living in the South. Back in the South. We were in New Orleans. We came over from New Orleans. And I remember that funeral. So, of course, they had her hair done. That was the number one thing, first of all.
Explain what you mean.
She had her hair straightened as a corpse. And she, in her life, she was one of the first people who wore a natural. She always wore her hair natural. So she hardly even looked like herself. I could hardly go up there. Oh, God, what a nightmare that was. And then we were outside afterwards. I completely broke down, sobbed. Casey came over to me. "Why are you crying so much?" she said. "Don't cry so much." I cried a lot. So there was a view, I think Foreman held this, I didn't agree with this, that I don't know if she was poisoned or the government did something. I think her immune system just completely crashed from what happened to her in the prison, but mostly in breaking rocks. I was later, they explained to me, from side to side on the road. It was completely useless, harassing, horrible physical work. So she was a complicated character. I did. Catherine Ruby Zellner. And also after Bob's mother. So it was after two people. So she was a difficult, passionate person. And she really cared. Now, to think that I appreciate that she got married and had a child and worked for SNCC and managed to keep all of that going somehow. Really, my hat's off to her. And then, I don't know how many months she was sick. And I think she was 26 when she died. She had to have been sick a year because I know she was in the hospital for weeks and weeks and weeks in New York. So she didn't have much time. She had 25 years, you know. Now, I don't remember her being a big architect of policy. Maybe she was in meetings that I wasn't. You would probably know more than I would. But she's the one that I remember. She'd say, I mean, if you look at some of the minutes, she'd say, "Where are the floaters?" She said. She wanted to know what is so-and-so doing? When I used to answer the phone and people had to speak, I said, "Ruby wants to talk to you." Whoa! The men were petrified of her. Petrified of her. Oh.
So, how did you feel about going into Mississippi in Freedom Summer after you did the interview?
Oh, I was terrified. I was terrified. I spent weeks imagining, if I could only get run over. If I got run over and just broke my foot, what's so bad about that?
You're going to be like the draft dodgers and take yourself out of the action.
Yeah, and here, I mean, you talk about a psychological issue. Here I was vetting people to go to a place that I myself was terrified about going, was hoping something would happen. No, it was terrible, terrible. And ever since, I'll never be the same. Whenever I see that sign, here it is years and years later. I have to hand it to you for living in that place.
I didn't know any better.
But I mean, I don't think it's worse than Alabama. My heart didn't drop when I went into Alabama. They kill you in Alabama just as much.
Yeah.
Well, you know, the other day I was talking about terrorism. I said, we're the ones who have been victims of terror. If you define terror as violence against the civilian population to create fear for a political objective, okay? If that's terrorism. We had nothing but terrorism. But of course, they're not terrorists because they're white. White people are never terrorists. In fact, this Ruth, the one who killed the people in South Carolina, he was not a terrorist. The white people are crazy. It's the Muslims and the black people who are terrorists, you know?
You were talking about the difference in how people perceive who's a terrorist.
Yeah.
What was your work in Mississippi that summer?
In Mississippi, I was one of the people on the Watts line. I did my 8 hours. I did the first 8.
And what did that entail?
That entailed keeping track of people who were arrested, doing some minimal work with the FBI, such as they were, being a press contact. That was it. And that's what I mean, the three of us split up the Watts line.
Who's the three of us?
Judy and Betty and me. So I did 7 to 3 or 9 to 5, whatever. So basically we were a contact for the parents, for the local people. I mean, the people local in the areas that the volunteers came from. Back and forth. Then, of course, when Harry and Sydney came in, then we, worked on, that tour. Mostly I was in the office, literally the office.
So did you get used to being in Mississippi when you're there?
Never. When we left, we went to New Orleans. I said, I'm in Paris. And New Orleans was segregated. I felt like I was in Paris. Oh my God. No, Judy has all kind of memories about going here and there. I didn't go anywhere. I was in that building. I didn't leave. I thought Bob was going to get killed. I thought, I'm going down the road that Rita has gone. That's what I thought.
You were saying about Foreman?
He didn't have manners. So when you dealt with him, you didn't do the normal thing about, saying something good, and then you'll say something critical, and then you'll blah, blah, blah. You didn't play those games. And he didn't play the games either. I mean, he'd call you up and he'd say, do blah, blah, blah. I mean, he didn't say please. He didn't say, he didn't have anything like that. But you knew when you knew him that he didn't mean anything by it. It wasn't an insult. It was the way he dealt with people. I remember when Kennedy was shot. Actually, this is nowhere in any book. I picked up the phone. It was him on the phone. It didn't even ring. Did not ring. I think I was picking it up to call him. He called me. He said, "Did you hear? Kennedy's been shot." He was beyond shocked. Of course, who wasn't beyond shocked? And his first thought was that Oswald had been one of ours, you know, in the movement. He was very unnerved, very unnerved. Then, the winter of 64, 65, was when I inadvertently found out that Barney Frank, who was then the assistant to Allard Lowenstein, had been at a party. Actually, we were at a party, and we heard that Al Lowenstein had been that Barney Frank had been at some meetings. And I called Foreman. I said, "There's something going on." So he said, "Go meet him." That's the kind of thing. That's what. Go meet with him. So I said, "Okay." So I met with him, and of course he told me to write it down immediately, and I did. And fortunately, Julian found it. He found it. I didn't know where it was. I said, "What?" He found it. I don't know how he found it. And of course, this is what they were planning to do, was planning to get SNCC out of the way. And it was a meeting of some very high-level people in the civil rights movement, in the more acceptable.
Summer meeting,
Yes.
where the
Yes.
National Council of Churches and all
Yes, NAACP, yes.
these, they're talking about a coalition of civil rights
Yes.
groups in New York making decisions
Yes.
about what's going on in Mississippi.
That's right. And to make sure that the next summer, the summer of 65, which there never was, it never occurred, would not be controlled by SNCC. That SNCC was too out there, too far out there. They didn't like the loyalty oath issue. And he verified it, and I wrote that. I mean, what Foreman taught me, of course, Foreman did not teach us to put dates.
Yes, I've noticed that.
Why is it that none of us, it's none of us. Maybe Judy was the only one to put a date on it.
Well, some letters have dates, but the press releases just have months and days and no year.
But that's very common, see. That comes from the newspaper. You read the New York Times.